Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the IRDR conference. And for today, we are about to have the keynote session 2, Knowledge in Action. As in the previous 2 days, that we have looked through what IRDR has been doing in the last 10 years, and we have discussed in-depth discussions regarding the new research agenda and the priorities. But IRDR is always a program for action, and this community has been always active, productive, dynamic in taking actions. And how we put the knowledge in action, we will listen to the keynote speakers at this session. And for this session, we will have Dr. Elsa Holloway from New Zealand and Alonso Torres from Latin America Network to moderate the session. Elsa and Alonso, I give you the floor to lead the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chun-Li. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Elsa Holloway, and I'm joining the conference from Auckland University of Technology in Tamaki Makaurau, also known as Auckland in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is my great pleasure to co-host this important session on knowledge and action with my colleague from the University of Costa Rica, Dr. Alonso Brenes Torres. Alonso, would you like to start the session with some opening remarks?
Thank you, Elsa, and good morning and good evening and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to join Elsa co-moderating this session. And I just quickly like to say that, remark the importance of this topic we will be developing today, especially in the current context. We are all entangled right now with the pandemic, and the way we have seen and we have refloating the importance on the development or good science policies, I think it's beyond discussion the relevance of these interconnections and interlinkages between the public policy, the private sector, and the scientific community. I think the fast action we have seen in terms of the tackling of this big global challenge we are facing right now in terms of coming out of this pandemic the best way possible couldn't be feasible without the support of the scientific community, the connection between the governance and the private sector. And I think this we can derive very valuable lessons from this dynamic and this current challenge. We can take a lot of valuable lessons for our specific field of research in terms of disaster risk and systemic risk, and how we can, as scientific community, will be more compelled to be linked to the fundamentals of development, how we have a clear mandate from our governments, but also from our communities, from our people, from our constituents. Whatever the role we are playing, we will have to take in greater account the role as scientific community, the role as scientists, the role a community that will deposit different tools and means for collectively achieve a common goods and to achieve together better living standards and set back in track the development agenda that had been eroding and setting back significantly due to this global shock. So I say, and my invitation for this session is to keep in the back of the head the relevance and the agenda and the challenges we will be facing restarting development after this global shock eases away. So I left it here and I'll pass back to Elsa. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much, Alonso. Thank you for keeping our feet on the ground as we go forward into this session. And yes, the research agenda that we've been discussing over the last couple of days really does challenge us, to think about multiple and inventive pathways to strengthen those synergies between knowledge and action. So today we're going to hear 3 presentations that signal just some of the potential opportunities for implementation. These are not exclusive. They are not the only approaches, but they indicate the immense scope in this field for action and challenge us, almost provoke us to start thinking of new ways that we might want to go forward. So to kick off, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Glenn Fernandez, who will lead off this discussion. He's an associate professor at the Institute for Disaster Management and Reconstruction at Sichuan University, Hong Kong Polytechnic University in Chengdu, China. He is an IRDR young scientist with more than 10 years of involvement in research and advocacy related to youth participation in disaster risk reduction. And his presentation today importantly focuses on unleashing the potential of young disaster risk reduction professionals through bigger roles and better support. Glenn, please take us through this stimulating presentation.
Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, thank you very much. Good evening from the Philippines. As Dr. Holloway mentioned, I'm an associate professor at the Institute for Disaster Management and Reconstruction of Sichuan University in China. I have very limited bandwidth and it's raining here in Manila, so I'm going to turn off my video just so I won't be disconnected. Okay. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to represent my fellow young scientists in this session. In preparing my presentation slides, I was able to get the inputs of several of my fellow IRDR young scientists. Yesterday, at the close of day 2 of the conference, IRDR Executive Director, Professor Chun-Li Han, emphasized that the first session of day 3 will be about actions, not just ideas. In my presentation, I will first share some of the accomplishments of the young DRR professionals in converting knowledge into action. Then I will enumerate some of the challenges young professionals for a while have encountered, and then provide some suggestions from IRDR young scientists for overcoming these challenges in order to achieve even bigger accomplishments in terms of actions in the future. In my presentation, I will rely mainly on two recent publications for my examples. The first one is the report on the status of science and technology in DRR in Asia Pacific, published in 2020 by UNDRR and the Asia Pacific Science, Technology, and Academia Advisory Group. This report features many practical projects by young professionals. Here are some of the case studies focusing on action on the ground in different parts of Asia. First, there was a youth hackathon for DRR in Nepal. As you know, in a hackathon, a group of persons with similar interests gather in one venue to solve real-world problems. Then in Thailand, young professionals explored virtual reality or VR application for flash flood education. Utilizing virtual reality allows the users to immerse in a virtual education. And then based on their vicarious experience, the users might be able to plan on how they will deal with actual floods. In another case study, young professionals in India utilized GIS to create damage scenarios for earthquakes. Based on the exposure of population and physical assets, they estimated the probable damages and the loss of lives that may be expected if an earthquake will happen. This quantification of losses can help in developing evidence-based preparedness strategies. Professor Virginia Murray will give you the next example because it is about public health. Young scientists are utilizing state-of-the-art climate change and health modeling techniques to develop dengue-related warning system in the Philippines. Annually, dengue fever is a very big public concern in the Philippines, and it has been a significant cause of hospitalization and death among young children. This is therefore an important contribution. Next, in Indonesia, young professionals developed a search engine for policymakers and government officials for research on risk and resilience. This engine is a user-friendly tool for connecting science, policy, and actions for resilience building. Then in Thailand, the Hydroinformatics Institute has a telemetry system that automatically records hydrometeorological data such as temperature, air pressure, humidity, rainfall, and others. The automated system can transmit data every 10 minutes to cellular and satellite networks. The system can also send SMS alerts to government agencies and stakeholders when critical situations which can potentially lead to disasters. So the young professionals in Thailand are contributing in providing early warning to disasters. The next example is about disaster waste management contingency planning in coastal cities in Fiji and the Philippines. I'm actually the project leader of this ongoing initiative. Based on past experiences, such as in the 2013 Super Typhoon Haiyan, the amounts of waste generated by typhoons or cyclones can overwhelm local government capacity and affect other important tasks, such as rescue operations and delivery of humanitarian aid. It can take weeks or even months to dispose of disaster waste. It is therefore necessary for coastal cities, frequently affected by typhoons, to have adequate capacity for post-disaster waste management. Our team is assisting coastal cities to develop their disaster waste management contingency plan way before the next big typhoon. In one of the case studies, we featured several examples of youth participation in disaster recovery. Aside from the usual commonly conducted activities, such as collecting donations, joining cleanup activities, and helping in the distribution of goods, young professionals are also utilizing new technology in DRR, such as using drones in post-impact assessment in Indonesia. All of these examples prove that if young professionals are provided with opportunities to contribute to DRR, they can rise up to the challenge. The next set of examples that I will be sharing are taken from the book chapters written by IRDR young scientists themselves. Professor Mizan Bisri already showed some details about the book on day one of this conference. The first example is the application of machine learning for developing short-term flood and drought forecasting models in Ecuador. The forecasting models can be used as basis for policymakers and decision makers in developing integrated plans from a local and regional perspective. In the second example, young scientists utilized trend analysis of cyclone-induced storm surges over the Indian Ocean. Based on historical data from storm surges that happened between 1990 and 2010, they analyzed the potential impacts of storm surges in the future. Again, the projections from the trend analysis will be helpful in coming up with preparedness strategies for exposed communities. This initial work by young scientists can lead to other opportunities for intervention, such as the application of nature-based solutions, one example of which is the rehabilitation of mangrove forests in coastal areas. Mangrove forests can serve as bioshields against strong winds and strong waves. We all know that young people are experts in using social media applications, such as TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. In the next example, young scientists monitored disaster information dissemination on social media related to Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico and the US in 2017, in order to understand the public's concern, especially the public's opinion of the emergency management effort by the government. The study aimed to help in improving the provision of accurate disaster information by the government and in minimizing the spread of fake news. The study also calls for emergency management institutions to monitor social media in order for them to be responsive to affected communities. In the IRDR book, there's also an example of incorporating knowledge in post-disaster reconstruction in Fiji. According to the young scientists who conducted the study, creating space for indigenous knowledge, skills, practices, and materials in the post-disaster reconstruction allows for the empowerment of the affected residents and enhances the ability to achieve a timely and efficient recovery. Another example in the IRDR book is on leveraging youth engagement in DRR through science, engineering, technology, and innovation in Indonesia. This chapter explores how the current national policies and institutions provide enabling environment for the youth and young professionals in Indonesia to participate in reducing disaster risks. Over the years, more and more international disaster risk reduction events featuring young professionals are being organized. This is a photo from the international workshop held at the Institute for Disaster Management and Reconstruction of Sichuan University in December 2019. This event was supported by IRDR and UNSPAR. In this IRDR conference, we've heard a lot about UNSPAR, the platform for the engagement of youth and young professionals in DRR that was launched in Indonesia and which now has 12 active chapters. The promotion of innovation and the promotion of access to DRR information are high in the list of priorities of UNSPAR. I myself have a little contribution to the promotion of youth engagement in DRR. In 2015, I and Professor Rajiv Shaw, who is also speaking in this session, published a book on youth participation in community-based disaster risk reduction in the Philippines. Our work was cited by the National Youth Commission when they lobbied for the inclusion of youth representatives in the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. I was very happy to be able to contribute to evidence-based policy advocacy for youth inclusion in DRR. However, not everything has been smooth sailing for young DRR professionals. Many of us faced barriers and hurdles along the way. These are some of the challenges young DRR researchers and practitioners have faced. I took this from the report on the status of science and technology in DRR in Asia Pacific. Common challenges include lack of institutional support for transforming ideas into actions, lack of financial support for implementing and upscaling projects, the exclusion of young professionals in rural areas. Most of the activities are in big cities and universities. The need for opportunities to collaborate and to innovate together, and the difficulty in raising funds for our voluntary and public service activities. To overcome these challenges, here are some suggestions from my fellow IRDR young scientists. Number one, we need to adopt the principle of inclusion and participation. Nothing about us without us. This means that in the formulation of youth-centered DRR programs, young people should be involved from the very beginning, from the program initiation phase until completion. Number two, we should also increase opportunities for high-quality mentorship from senior scientists via job shadowing, on-the-job training, internships, and providing hands-on experience. If you can recall, according to Dale's Cone of Experience, learners retain more information by what they do as opposed to what they hear, read, or observe. We should promote learning by doing or experiential learning when mentoring young professionals. Another suggestion is to provide seed funding and startup funds for young researchers, especially those in neglected areas in the social sciences, like disaster psychology. I was very fortunate to participate in the 2017 Advanced Institute on Knowledge-Based Actions for DRR, or AIKBA, organized by Professor Wei-Sen Lee and his colleagues at the IRDR International Center of Excellence in Taipei, and by the International Science Council Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. The organizers provided participating young scientists with seed funding for our projects. I hope there will be more opportunities like this from IRDR in the future as young scientists. We should also expose young DRR professionals to more challenging roles, such as being principal investigator, project team leader, editorial board member, scientific committee member, co-designer and co-developer of DRR programs, and as early career champions. Professor Rajiv Shaw and Elsevier very generously invited me to be one of the inaugural section editors of the Progress in Disaster Science Journal. I hope the other DRR journals will also admit young scientists into their editorial team and editorial board. And maybe IRDR Scientific Committee and the national committees should also have young scientists as members. We should also establish platforms for multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaborations. As Professor Gretchen Kalonji mentioned yesterday, we should support not only the individual young professionals, but also the youth organizations and youth networks. This will allow us to reach out to more young people in different countries, and we won't get to see the same faces over and over. We should share opportunities more broadly. IRDR young scientists also have suggestions to our peers. As young DRR professionals, we should be more vocal and assertive in demanding more meaningful participation in problem solving. And we should be more active in reaching out to policymakers and decision makers in order to turn DRR knowledge into the DRR action. I would like to acknowledge the following IRDR young scientists for helping me prepare my presentation. It is very heartwarming to know that my fellow young scientists are very helpful and cooperative. I am very grateful to IRDR for establishing and supporting the IRDR Young Scientist Program. I'll end my presentation with this photo with some of our very helpful and friendly, including immediate past and present IRDR Executive Directors, Professor Rajiv Shaw and Professor Chun-Li Han, the Dean of IDMR, Professor Gretchen Kalonji, who is very supportive to young scientists and practitioners, and Pa Ardito of UNESCO Jakarta office for always supporting UNSPAR. Young professionals are able to accomplish many things because of our dynamism and passion, and of course, because of the untiring guidance and support of our mentors. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you for following.
Thank you so much, Glenn, for provoking us with a very energetic presentation to start the discussion, and unlocking a whole range of opportunities that we should be thinking about more broadly. You've also highlighted the fact that this field is an intergenerational one. It's highly intergenerational one, and you've spoken about that in your presentation. And in this context, I'm pleased to invite Dr. Rajiv Shaw to follow on. Rajiv is a professor at the Graduate School of Media and Governance at Keio University in Japan. All of us know Rajiv. He is prolific. He is a prolific advocate for strengthening disaster risk reduction and advancing knowledge and science in the domain, and is co-chair currently for UNDRR's Asia and Pacific Scientific and Technical Advisory Group. Rajiv's going to share his thoughts today, importantly on issues around education and communication as they apply to advancing a vigorous research agenda in the disaster risk domain. Rajiv, could you take us through this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ailsa. Thank you, Alonso. Good to see both of you. Thank you for this opportunity. Let me share my screen. I think what Glenn has pointed out, that made my job much easier. Glenn, you should have put my name also, and we should have a combined presentation, because what you told is exactly like, that's my dream and that's my wish. So thank you very much, Glenn, for this excellent summary. And I thank all the IRDR young scientists for their contribution. So what I would like to point out a few thoughts. Let's see that whether I can make a little bit of value addition to what Glenn has pointed out. First, you see my slide title. Although this particular session is named as Knowledge in Action, my own feeling, my own experience working in this particular field is I think I would also like to argue that we should also change our mindset, not only from knowledge in action, but also knowledge from action. There are lots of work which is done by non-scientists, by the communities, by the local government, how we reflect that also back into knowledge. And that's my argument, to put knowledge in / from action. So that will be my possibility. I will come back to this issue a little bit later part, but before that, let me put a few context, especially which I think is quite relevant for the future IRDR roadmap, and we need to keep this mind, keep this context at least to me. I mean, there are many different contexts, but those which were quite a bit seemed important to me. First is the research gap. Like this was an work which we did with Elsevier. Means many of you are aware about this work, that what is the gap in the overall disaster science research. So this was a global outlook, and it was actually, we were seeing what has been the main research, where it actually concentrated, which country did maximum number of research and so on, and where are the major gaps. And of course, like China this was a 5-year period, 2012 to 2017. China has the highest number of publication, followed by US, then Japan, and so on. I won't go into the number on this, but I think to me, this part is very alarming on the top. What is written on the key findings, that the death toll versus publication, like the countries which have the highest death toll, they have lowest number of publication. And where the publications are mostly concentrated are where the economic losses are high. And that actually still, like we have been discussing this for many years, the North-South divide of the major publication and the major research. So I think in some way, when we talk about the knowledge creation, we need to try to break this particular barrier. And I hope that our future endeavor in IRDR, the future roadmap implementation, will try to address this one. In my personal capacity, I always try to encourage the young students, young researchers, faculty members from the southern countries, more on the developing countries. In our journal, we give the APC waiving for certain countries which are of lower economic level and who possibly have not that much of avenue to make the publication. So I think this is a major barrier, and even now in the IPCC work, also in the climate change issues also, I think still we are getting this knowledge gap which exists in the developing countries. So that's my context number one. Context number two, many of you are following this global research outlook, and which is published by World Economic Forum. And we all know that in whether it is in terms of likelihood or impacts, the green color, green boxes, which are the environmental risks, are getting more importance, and both in terms of the likelihood and in terms of the impact. But if you look at this year, the new report, of course, the infectious disease due to COVID-19, it came number one as in terms of the impact. But two things is especially alarming to me, which is in terms of the likelihood, there are two, this magenta color, which are more the technological risk. One is the digital power concentration and the digital inequality. And these two are becoming high risk in terms of the likelihood. I think this, due to COVID-19, whether it is work from home, education from home, then health consultation from home, I think we are gradually focusing more on the digital transformation, but that also brings us this major divide, those who have and those who have not a proper digital connectivity. And I think that this will also reflect in future very strongly different aspects of research agenda. And again, we need to think about this very, very carefully, this digital power concentration and digital inequality. Context number 3, again, we are all aware that this UNDRR Global Assessment Report 2019 very much talked about that living with uncertainty, and for last 1.5 year with the COVID-19, we have been living with uncertainty. But also with that, we have seen more the systemic risk or the cascading risk or the complex risk. So I think the overall risk landscape is becoming more complex, and what we are seeing possibly combination of natural and natural hazard, natural and biological hazards, natural and technological hazards. So there are different types of combination, and how we actually address in our future research agenda in this dynamic and the complex issues of the risk landscape, I think that is also quite major challenging. Context number 4 is the evolution of different disciplines. We have been discussing this. We possibly interchange this terminology, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. Just earlier this week, day before yesterday, I've been attending a conference organized by Virginia Tech in US, and they have been doing tremendous work on what are the critical boundaries between these different types of discipline. And I think that this particular table I quote from some of the papers which are presented there, that I think multidisciplinarity, we talk about it's a sequential process. Different disciplines are working, but independently. When you talk about the interdisciplinarity, then it is more interactive, possibly working jointly. But what we need is, again, a transdisciplinary approach, which is like, it's an integrated or integrative process where a synthesis of different disciplines occurs. And possibly, again, we have not been able to do that. We always talk about working with different disciplines, but all different disciplines are in their particular domain. So I think we had traditional disciplines, engineering, science, architecture, urban planning, and so on. And we have been seeing this for the last 30 years. Possibly the non-traditional discipline, which are the health science, disaster nursing, different data specialty. These are possibly coming in last maybe 10, 15 years. But where our emerging discipline, I think the DRR policy as a discipline, DRR innovation as a discipline, DRR diplomacy as a discipline. And when you talk about policy, innovation, diplomacy, unless we do transdisciplinary, it's very, very difficult. We have been possibly working on this over the last maybe 5 to 7 years quite intensively. So that's my context number 4. And my context number 5 is, I go back to the title, that when we talk about knowledge in and knowledge from action, this particular diagram we have been using for some time for when we established the Asian University Network. Unfortunately, it's not anymore the dominant, but there are loose network. So we saw that we have field practice, we have university education, and how we bring this together, how we actually filtering up some field practices and bring it to our knowledge bank. And that's actually knowledge from action. I think that part is increasingly recognized possibly in different curriculum. And research is something which actually fills that particular gap between education and field practice. And we often love to use this word called last mile connectivity. For any technology, we say last mile connectivity. And that's possibly, to me, like at least for last few years, I have been trying to thinking and arguing on this issue, that it is, when you say the last mile, it is from our perspective, the provider perspective. But I think gradually we are getting conscious that that last mile should be the first mile. That means we put the first value to the, or first step from the user perspective. So you have been possibly listening to this word co-designing and co-delivery of the research. I think that co-designing and co-delivery part should be possibly very strong pillar of the education in future. So with those 5 contexts, this is exactly what Glenn has pointed out. Apart from the IRDR Young Scientist, he also talked about You Inspire Alliance. We have You Inspire Alliance members here. We will listen to them. And I think that this is gradually increasing. But I observed 2 specific things here, and my wish or future wish for this one would be that still the most of it is concentrated in the Asia Pacific region. I think we need to expand this youth leadership more strongly globally. You see that in the IRDR Young Scientist map, there are spots in the Africa, there are spots in the Latin America, but I think the proactiveness is still possibly, I won't say lacking, but possibly we can be more proactive to tell it in a more positive way. Similarly, You Inspire, it started from Asia. It started actually originated from Indonesia. We see the footprint now very nicely in different parts of Asia. So I hope that it goes beyond the region because the need is extremely, extremely high in, again, many other developing countries in Africa or in Latin America and Caribbean. And then another, my main request or preach to the young scientist is like, go for the quality output. I think this is extremely, extremely important. Advocacy, presenting in the conferences, making your voice heard is very important, and you are very good in doing that. But also try to have a good output. And you be part of that. And you rightly pointed out, Glenn, that it needs to be part of the decision-making process from the beginning. So I think that's a very, very important part. And this part is like for last at least 2-3 years, we have been thinking, we have been doing this one, that science-based entrepreneurship, like how you link the science and entrepreneurship together. And that, again, we have not been able to do properly. And I hope that the IRDR, the future roadmap, provides some sort of ecosystem for entrepreneurship development, where the social innovation becomes one of the key words. And we have still, in a very, very nascent stage, I will say the whole DRR field is still in a very nascent stage in the overall social innovation or the social entrepreneurship. The summary of my talk is, I think the identifying and reducing the gaps are very important. We need to be more inclusive, whether it is disciplinary gap, whether it is North-South divide gap, whether it is digital divide gap. So I think that part is extremely important, that inclusive research agenda. So I really hope that the IRDR future research agenda becomes more inclusive. Everybody has a space for that. Addressing the cascading systemic and complex risk scenario. It's not anymore that I am a flood specialist, I am a tsunami specialist, I am a volcanic specialist. Yes, you are, that's particular expertise, but then how we see or how we link our expertise together, trans and multi-sectoral, transdisciplinary and multi-sectoral. And then I strongly believe, and in this particular word, that last mile as the first mile. If we can, or if we are able to change this last mile as the first mile through youth engagement, through social innovation, through entrepreneurship platform, I think that will be very good. And I strongly hope that we have so many ICOEs, International Center of Excellency in IRDR, and it can actually have, it can be sort of knowledge action incubator for this whole young youth engagement or the young entrepreneurship for generating social innovation. I will stop here. Thank you very much, and over to you, Elsa.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. Once again, a stimulating and challenging presentation, pointing to directions that we should be thinking of considering and going forward in the future. One of the areas of concern, as you mentioned, was were the challenges around digital divide, around increasing dependency on and interdependency on ICT systems that are interlinked. And that leads us to our third keynote presentation from Dr. Claudia Berchtold, who is a senior researcher and project manager at the Fraunhofer Institute for Technological Trend Analysis in Euskirchen, Germany. She's involved in research on disaster risk and crisis management and the related use of innovative technologies. And in her presentation today, Claudia is going to speak to an intriguing topic, the two sides of the innovation coin, capability pull and technology push. Claudia, please take us through this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asa. It's an honor to be here today. So thank you very much for inviting me to have this talk. Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and I would have loved to meet you in person because I only knew a few of you. But anyhow, let's make the best of it, and let's see whether yeah, I can raise some interesting points for you. So as you mentioned, I wanted to speak about the different aspects of innovation, particularly capability pull and technology push. So yeah, maybe some introductory thoughts. So overall, the innovation, sorry, challenging seeing my own slides. So here we go, that's better. There's a descriptive and there's a normative dimension to innovation. So what do we actually mean with innovation? So one aspect is that we could think of something entirely new, so something really a new invention. And we could also talk about practices or solutions that are something new to the context we translate them to. So that could include equipments, products, and services. But so that's more than, let's say, a translation of a good practice. And the question is a little bit, what type of innovation are we looking for in disaster risk reduction? And then there's a normative dimension dealing with the question of, is innovation per se good? And if we look, for example, into atom physics or genetics research, there are a range of ethical and societal acceptability aspects that need to be discussed. So as was also mentioned during the past days of the previous speakers, is the question of who should actually be involved in the development of innovation. So I mean, we cannot necessarily control the exact outcome, but we could control on who should be involved, who should have a say in the way we develop new solutions. Oh, yeah, next slide. So having said that, there are key features of, or there are different innovation concepts, let's say, and they have evolved over time. So there are also different generations of innovation concepts. And obviously, yeah, of the way we innovate or how innovations arise is quite complex, and there's what I mentioned here is the fifth generation of that takes networking, continuous innovation, system integration into consideration. But I want to look a little bit into the first generations on linear models, dealing with the question of how do innovations actually arise, and this particularly deals with the so-called capability pull and the technology push. So what do we actually mean with capability pull and technology push? So if we look at the technology push, this is basically the assumption that all solutions are driven by technological breakthroughs. So that also means that all the attention goes into funding of research and development with little inputs from the users. And my feeling is a little bit that, yeah, we're currently still focusing too much on that part of what I call the innovation coin. So if we focus on that model of innovation, let's say, there's also the question, if we follow this way of innovating, let's say, then how do we actually identify the relevant solutions? And one option is to conduct technology foresight, which is one of the main activities we conduct at our institute. And there are different ways of conducting technology foresight and trying to understand what might be relevant innovations in like 10, 15, or 20 years from now. What we do in our institute, and maybe that's of interest for you, is that we use Bibliometrics. So we have developed a system where we use different databases such as the Web of Science, patent databases, and so on, and we create keyword searches and then understand in the changes in the publication behavior, let's say, how different topics increase over time. That's what you see here. How different countries also engage in the publication to different topics. This is a sectoral segmentation, or what you see here, for example, is how certain keywords move across different fields of research. So how it's first applied, let's say, in social sciences, and it moves to environmental sciences. So this is how we try to understand this technology push and what might be of relevance for different sectors. But what I think is of particular interest, and I think this is also going somehow in the direction that Rajiv just mentioned, and what you call the last mile, is the capability pool. So what do we mean with a capability pool? This is basically assumption that the solutions are developed according to consumer needs. So if we follow that understanding of innovation, then the funding goes to the understanding of these consumer needs. So it's they're sort of the two sides of the coin, and usually somehow the reality is in the middle. But if we follow the capability pool approach, then the funding does not only go to the R&D with a little input from the users, but it goes into the understanding of the consumer needs and then into dialogue formats. So here's the question more: what are the actual needs of the stakeholders? What are the products they would want to procure? So interestingly, there are a range of fields that have already applied strategic capability needs identification. And the most popular one is the defense sector. So NATO, for example, follows that approach of identifying capabilities they would want to have in like 10, 15, 20 years from now. And they specify these capabilities and then start translating them into requirements for the products they would want to procure. Similarly, for example, in the response sector, this approach is becoming more applied. And for example, the International Forum to Advance First Responder Innovation, IFAFRI, has just recently identified 10 areas where improved technologies could greatly enhance their safety, effectiveness, and efficiency. And last but not least, the European Commission has in February only released a communication on an action plan to develop synergies between civil defense and space industries. And again, one of the key messages is that focus should be put on a capability-driven approach, so that the users define what capability they need, and then finally express these needs to the industry to procure the products they want. So how does this look in practice? Because as I mentioned, then if we follow that line of thought, the funding goes to the better understanding of the actual needs, and there are, again, obviously there's a range of options. A couple of ways that we have applied that approach is to focus on more on the status quo, let's say. So this is a task-based discussion, trying to understand what are first responder tasks at the moment, what are challenges, what is already working well, what could be enhanced, and how. But some of my colleagues have, for example, also contributed to futures assessed alongside socio-technical evolutions. So that's a capability assessment approach implemented together for NATO, based on explorative future scenarios. So there are different future pictures were developed, let's say, and it was a very creative process of trying to understand what is it that they would actually need in these different futures. So, however, capability gap and technology push analysis are only part of the innovation story. So obviously the issue is much more complex, and it's not only done with identifying the capability gaps and then find a solution, but also a broader analysis of the innovation environment and their aspects such as legal frameworks, policy frameworks, but for example, also aspects of organizational culture play a role in determining why or how certain solutions are applied or are not applied. And then finally, also, of course, there are sources of discontinuity, such as the development of new markets, the changes in public opinion or behavior, but also crisis and disaster. And obviously, COVID-19 is one of the most recent examples in how this affects also the need for certain capabilities. So finally, some thoughts about some more market perspective, let's say, some results that we have developed in the context of the European Association of the Research and Technology Organizations, and more particularly in the working group for security and defense aspects, is that there are quite some specificities of the civil security market, which I feel could potentially be taken more into account when thinking about the implementation of the future research agenda. So one aspect is that usually the governmental market is a market with much less pressure as compared to the private markets, for example. And then also this is usually linked with public procurement, and that again tends to follow tends to involve larger providers, which again would work on improving or exploiting the existing products, but not necessarily really assess the needs of their clients. And then also the governmental organizations usually lack the time and the resources to be involved into the more long-term capability and innovation planning. And also, and this is one of the main issues, is that the market is so scattered. So there's such a big range of stakeholders, ranging from strategic to operational level when it comes to this response phase. But if we consider the different risk management phases, then the variety becomes again even broader. And finally, we find that frequently is the non-technological part of the innovation. So the aspects of organization, of training, of procedures and cooperation schemes that are needed to actually turn a technology into real capability. And this is an aspect that might need some additional attention. So to end this talk, or to summarize, I brought some thoughts, or try to summarize some questions that might be of interest, or we should give some attention in the future. So one is related to the type of innovation that we're envisaging. This is something that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. So are we really looking into entirely new products? Are we looking, or do we want gradual developments of certain solutions that already exist? How can we enhance the exchange of knowledge on best practices that exist and translate them into new contexts? And also, which normative assumptions play a role when we do our research? So who's involved, who's heard, who's playing a role in determining how the final product will look like? Then obviously, which innovation concepts build the basis? And as said, as most of the times, the answer will be somewhere in the middle. But do we follow a technology push approach, or do we follow a capability pull approach? And if we follow the capability pull approach, then how do we assess these gaps and needs at a larger scale? So and as I mentioned, so some activities are taking place in the response phase, but how could we implement that for prevention, preparedness, and recovery phases? And then also, who should play a role in defining these? How could we set up processes to identify the needs on a larger scale? How can it be organized? How can it be funded? And also, how do we integrate aspects or the broader innovation cycle, let's say aspects of the innovation environment, legal aspects, organizational aspects determining innovation? How can we generate more insights on this? And then finally, how do we respond to the specificities of what I call the civil security market? So once we have defined the capability needs of the stakeholders and disaster risk reduction, how can we define or develop mechanisms to have joint procurement mechanisms, for example? And this is something that gets some attention in the European research field on risk management, at least. So yeah, with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention and the chance to have this talk here. This is the literature I've used, and yeah, these are my contact details. I'll leave it here with the questions. Maybe. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Claudia. That once again challenges us to think into the future and in an increasingly complex world with interconnected risks, what kind of capabilities do we need to be considering? Now we've had, I think, a really intensive 45 minutes of input from our three keynote speakers. Could I pass the mic to Rahma, please, as our first discussant, to give her thoughts and reactions. Dr. Rahma Hanifa is the Young Scientist Representative Member for the Asia Pacific Scientific and Technical Advisory Group. Most notably, of course, Rahma has founded this dynamic alliance we speak of in Asia and the Pacific, UInspire. This is an alliance of youth and young professionals, and she is its first Secretary General. Rahma, your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ailsa, and apology that this is just when the Azan is starting. It's the prayer call in Indonesia, so it's a bit noisy from here. Good afternoon, everyone, and greeting from Indonesia. It is such an honor and pleasure to be invited into this forum. Distinguished speakers, Dr. Glenn, Prof. Rajiv Shaw, and Dr. Claudia, I much enjoy your talk. Dr. Glenn has showcased various concrete examples on young professionals and a need to empowering their role and better support. Prof. Rajiv has raised on education and communication, and I'm also triggered with a graphic on desktop versus publication, as I'm from Indonesia, and that Jakarta is on the top list of the disaster risk landscape. There's a lot of homework for us in Indonesia and in Asia Pacific in general. And Dr. Claudia has explained on key features on innovative concepts differ between generations, capability pool and technology pool approaches. Those talks emphasize a need for a more effective collaboration in bridging between science, policy, practice, and also between knowledge producer and potential knowledge users. We have seen youth and young professionals within the UInspire network that show their motivation and determination in contributing to DRR and climate change by utilizing science, technology, engineering, and innovation, as Dr. Glenn and Prof. Rajiv has mentioned, in a more effective research and analyzing data and information, in risk communication, in art, design, and development of innovative low-cost technologies and tools, and in applying science and technology advancement for local actions that directly contribute to the community, and supporting evidence-based policy making and advocacy based on data. Disaster also often require rapid response and adaptation of modern technology, which is also sensitive to each different local and social context. In the case of developing countries, and also remote area and small island, where adaptation of new technology is more difficult, young people embody the much needed abilities to bridge the gap between the new and conventional techniques, such as the Internet of Things and information technologies that are led by indigenous communities and partnering with the young and eager minds. Disaster occurrences are also opportunity to produce knowledge in which is still lacking. And many of the volunteers in the field are actually young people. This is also an area to improve. Young people in disaster area and in local community can contribute to the data collection and information sharing through citizen science that includes collection of volunteer geographic information, utilization of mobile network and application, UAV mappings, taking street level imageries, interviews from the fields, and video documentary as being shared right now in the chat room together with DRR researchers, and many more. Data availability, information sharing, and knowledge production in the science is crucial. This allows youth and young professionals at every corner to take part in building resilience of cities, urban areas, and small islands. So I take 4 key from these sessions. The first one is encouraging youth and young professionals and providing institutional space for them. The need for a greater space for connection, promoting dialogue, networking, and young people on transdisciplinary collaboration to work in the region. This collaboration empowers young people roles and undertaking transboundary issues, promoting dialogues, and bridging information gaps from global to local and vice versa from local to global. The second is enhancing knowledge production. Here, the capacity building for young people is also needed, extending scholarship, research funding, and grant, not only to pursue higher education, but also knowledge production based on research for a more effective community engagement programs. In my own experience, when conducting community engagement, the materials that is available is very general usually. And when we go to the community, we actually need to contextualize the knowledge material to the local context. And this is one of the reasons why knowledge production and constantly updating is also important, including lesson learned from the recent disaster occurrence. The third one, science socio-entrepreneurship from Prof. Rajiv. And for this, seed funding is important to nurture innovation in resilience building, oriented businesses, and promote social and science entrepreneurship. Providing opportunity for scaling up businesses and enterprise for youth, social innovators and entrepreneurs, an opportunity to bring to the market, as Claudia has later mentioned, and mobilizing DRR social entrepreneurship in the region by promoting partnership and creating appropriate conditions for scaling up. The fourth one is paying attention with potential digital divide, especially in remote areas and small islands that also need equal capacity building. While some part of the region is flying high and flying fast, we need to keep serving and grounded on the local action and also pay attention to this area that need more special care. Lastly, on promoting innovation to DRR, You Inspire Alliance will have an upcoming activity on the monthly webinar to showcase youth and young professionals' contribution to DRR from various countries in Asia Pacific. And on the future DRR, as risk will always be there, one of our upcoming activities is focusing on future literacy and DRR engaging youth together with UNESCO Jakarta, UNDRR, and UNDP, and as an essential skill for youth and young professionals to move forward. We deeply thank the acknowledgement to empower engagement of youth and young professional leadership in the new normal. I believe youth and young professionals are shaping the future, and we believe in their capability of young people to contribute their ideas out of the box, creating innovation and helping to reach more people, building resilience to disaster in your future. Thank you very much.
Rahma, thank you so much. I think we're going to have a great deal of work to do into the future, and there's immense scope there for us to take forward. Our final discussant and panelist today is Dr. Bapon Fakudin. He's no stranger to IRDR, as you may have already heard from previous conference sessions. He's an expert climate change risk assessor and has designed early warning and emergency response projects in over 25 countries across Asia and the Pacific. He's also the technical director for disaster risk reduction and climate resilience at Tonkin and Taylor International in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Bapon, your thoughts after hearing the presentations?
Thanks, Elsa. Thanks again for giving me the floor. And I think the session actually quite went well in terms of, the knowledge in action, that what we are discussing, and all these participants, whoever here, actually, we all believe that how passionate we are on our field to working on the disaster risk reduction and how motivated we working together. But also, we all maybe believe that how at least we face any of those disasters, or whenever there is any kind of warning has been issued by the your national authority, how we actually seeking information, looking for advanced technology, advanced information to our betterment, to understand the know-how. So it's actually quite important to understand that the know-how that our speaker has been talked, and how we can actually apply our advanced knowledge tools, and as well as the engagement of the young professionals, which is quite important. But however, I think you all agree with me that there are so much research is going on throughout the globe, but how much actually of those research actually coming to our operational domain, and how much of those operational information actually transforming to the last mile that Rajiv actually quite strongly mentioned, that to reaching to the community to better understand their decision-making process. So I think that's need to be a little bit strengthening from thinner to a little bit widening, so that they understand the advanced research into their decision-making process. I'd like to again thanks Rajiv to bringing this last mile to the first mile things, and also as well as the need-based information that actually required to transform, as well as sending to the better interpret as well as apply to the society. And Dr. Claudia talking about the emerging field as well as innovation, and how the engagement and capacity building is important. There is no doubt on these things, but also this not only provide the DRR and climate change opportunity, but also to ensuring some of our complex problems that we are facing globally, and how we actually can unlock the long-term and sustainable prosperity for us as well as for our planet. But as other speakers also mentioned, I like to echo with them that we also need to be cautious, and to look at the unprecedented transformation also could pose some high risk for our society, to what we have and what we don't have, and how we actually judge or manage our equity to ensure the within our society to make them actually equitable as well as sustainable. So that's need to be looking at the perspective, because everything we tagged on the new emerging aspect, it has a resource constraints, resource tagging. So how that need to be ensured. And finally, the Glenn, I not seconded to you that, I mean, how important is our young scientists and our next generation, and why we need to actually make an enabling and ensuring an ecosystem for them, so that they can actually come with a passion, motivation, and to work together in the disaster risk reduction and climate change field. And how much actually, as this field is quite emerging, we need to be quite passionate and quite motivated and commitment, because otherwise this field doesn't work. So if we are not in these three areas, we are actually in the wrong bus, and we should actually look for a new change our bus in the future. And then finally, as a co-chair for CoData task group, technologies and transformation are actually transforming our day-to-day based on our need, based on our thinking, and it will keep changing. And information as well as data is the key, or the heart of the engine. So how we actually make sure that data is actually availability, and data actually follow a fair principle, the fair in a sense, which means you have findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable principles. So we need to make sure that data is there to better understand our risk, and better making sure that we have a safer communities and sustainable development goals. Thank you so much from my side.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bapon, and thanks for keeping us focused on closing that gap between research and action. This brings us to the end of the panel input, and I'm mindful that the clock is ticking, but I think that there is still time for one or two questions, and we have some available right now. So I'd like to take this question forward from Koichi Dahan, who is asking if it's not possible to create a platform between young researchers on risk so that they can know each other better, and how we might take that forward. I would like to direct that question to Glenn and maybe to Rahma.
Thank you very much, Professor Holloway. For me, I think there are already so many platforms already in existing. So what Dahan can do is to find these networks and apply for membership. Maybe if we create too many networks, we are going to spread ourselves too thin. So the best way would be to find existing networks and know how to get in, how to seek membership. Thank you.
Rahma, would you have anything to add to that? Rahma, I was wondering, do you have audio there? Okay, maybe it's a bit challenging. I know that. Okay, Rahma, would you like to comment on the question about how young researchers might network?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very important question. It's also what triggered UInspire platform to develop. As Dr. Glenn mentioned, and he has shown various platforms already existing. I think instead of building a new one, maybe it's also good to engage with already existing platform. And UInspire itself already have 12 national chapters. And if in your country there is not yet currently an UInspire chapter, we can work together on developing a new chapter in your country, so we can go on board together with a wider network. Maybe that's from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rahma. Now I think we are running out of time. Thank you very much for the packed session today. Could I invite Alonso to share some final thoughts, and then Chun-Li, if you would kindly close the session for us, we would be most grateful. Thank you very much. Alonso, over to you.
Thank you, Elsa. I'm having problems with the camera. I think I initiated a different session in another device and something happened. But anyway, I just want to thank to all the participants for these very challenging topics they put on the table. Those are very, very challenging and provocative topics that you develop, and I think we need, as a community, we need to take them more seriously in the future and have those topics as a major challenges to tackle throughout the different works we will be developing in the future. There is a lot of topics you mentioned, but I like to highlight regarding the potential of the young scientist community and the transdisciplinary challenges we are facing still as a body of research. You know, I start, sorry, because all this noise, a lot of trucks are going by, but you know, I started this in this field as a young scientist around 20-something years ago, and it strikes me very, very hard to basically seeing in this session the same topics that we were discussing 20 years ago. So my thought and the like to
I think we lost we have lost the Alonso's the voice.
with it. The questions are basically the arbor take.
You're muted.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, Alonso, I think a number of us will share your concerns about some of these agenda points recycling over time. We are running a little bit out of time now, so I'm going to close the session and request Chun-Li, if you would kindly bring our discussion to a close. Thank you to all the panelists, Alonso, and also to Sarah Lindberg, who is graciously rapporteuring for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alisa. Thank you, Alonso. Excellent talks and keynotes. Very thoughtful, very inspiring. I wanted to quote Professor Rajiv Shaw's the sentence, "They make the last mile as the first mile." That is actually very, very challenging. And we're all inspired by the initiatives and ideas and the creative work by the young researchers. And we see also the opportunities as well as the new challenges and risk coming with the advance of the technologies. With this, I think it will continue enrich our work for the future actions. Since we are, dear colleagues, since we are 5 minutes behind schedule, I would suggest that we move with big thanks to all the speakers, commentators, and to our two moderators, Arisa and Alonso. We move to the next session. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now we have the next session, the challenge and opportunities for cooperation. We have Dr. Nasreen from Jordan, from the Royal Society of Science, and we also have the Mahifasoa from Madagascar, both to lead and moderate this important session. Dr. Nasreen, you take the floor, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome all the participants for this session. Our session will focus on challenges and opportunities for cooperation. And the importance of this session arises from the new global research agenda on disaster risk reduction, which is part of the current global effort to accelerate science impact for 2030 agenda. Moreover, the second global forum of funders convened by the International Science Council last April deliberated the strategies and mechanisms for science funders to support mission-oriented science globally, which is highly relevant for the implementation of the new global research agenda on the disaster risk reduction. On the other hand, private sectors, including insurance enterprises, have been increasingly engaged in global disaster risk reduction research and disaster impact mitigation actions by using financial facilities, and are important stakeholders for disaster risk reduction research and policy communities. Thus, the two keynotes and the discussions in this session will deepen the understanding about the common challenges and to explore new opportunities for cooperation with the private sectors. And now I'll give the floor to Dr. Tiana.
Okay. Thank you, and welcome to this session. As I explained, we're going to have this keynote session about the challenges and the opportunities for cooperation. We're very happy to be moderating this session with my colleague Nesrine, and for that we can understand easily how important is the cooperation to really and effectively implement this new agenda. So the focus for this keynote session is about this issues of challenge and opportunities for cooperation. We are expecting the keynote speakers to provide us with some guidance, and also the discussion based on the comments from the respondents. And then the audience also will be given around 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. And we hope that we'll have a very fruitful session. So I hand over to Nissan to continue the moderation. Nissan, please. Thank you. Nisrin, do you hear me? I think you are still on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Because we are behind the schedule, we'll start with our first speaker, Dr. Albert van Jaarsveld. He's the CEO and Director General of EASA, co-lead of the Global Forum of Funders, and he will give a presentation about a framework to unleash mission-oriented science. Dr. Albert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nesrine and Tiana. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's wonderful to be here. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay with everybody. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the important work being done by the International Science Council at the moment to develop a framework for mission-oriented science in our broader science landscape to deal with some of the most urgent problems that we face. For those of you that read the newspapers or watch TV, you will be all too familiar with these issues, and this particular audience especially so. So this will not be a surprise to any of us, but I think the bottom line, and I think that the pity about this is that science has been talking about this and warning about the imminent dangers and the challenges we face as an international community for some time, but we've not managed to resolve some of these issues to date. And even as far as the Sustainable Development Goals are concerned, as you can see, we're off track in terms of developing on the objectives and the ambitions of the Sustainable Development Goals across the globe. And COVID, of course, has just made that situation much worse for us, just increasing the degree of the challenge that we face. So the International Science Council was tasked by the Global Forum of Funders to identify key areas for mission-driven science. The process that was followed included an inputs from IC-led call for submissions and we received quite a lot of responses in that regard. There was a review of agenda setting reports that was conducted, and also a synthesis of scientific literature from a group of experts. All of this fed into what the ISC tried to pull together as what they consider to be the key areas for mission-driven science. As it turns out, the areas that were identified through the International Science Council effort are closely aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and frankly, probably form the foundations of everything that we're talking about as far as the Sustainable Development Goals are concerned. And these actually speak directly to many of the most fundamental and basic needs that people have. These are those that were identified as potential key missions: food, water, urban areas, energy, and climate. And as all of you know, if we can't fix these problems, our society is not going to improve, and we're not going to be taking a step forward. And we certainly won't deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals if we can't tackle these effectively. So part of the problem that was raised in the conversations at the Global Forum of Funders is that the dominant or prevailing science system does not seem to be adequately positioned to deliver the kind of solutions that are required to tackle these imminent and very important crisis dimensions across the globe. Part of that is because the dominant science system is organized into elements which are familiar to all of you. They tend to be organized in silos, particular disciplinary ones. The practices are reinforced by cultures, and the current system is functionally interrelated in a way that drives performance and the way that people go about their work. The current science system operates in a particular context, and collectively, this system shapes what and how scientific knowledge is produced and used, and by whom. Now, the current science system, we think, needs a bit of a reorganization. At the moment, it is too narrowly focused, fragmented and abstracted from real-world problems. It's compartmentalized, sometimes exclusionary and disconnected from society's needs, and considered to be elitist and dominated by Western thinking, sometimes uncritical thinking, and sometimes even captured by established dogmas like the economic growth mindset, etc. What is really needed to transform society rapidly and efficiently and effectively is a system that enables institutional concentration of extensive brain trusts for focused periods of time, cross and transdisciplinary integration, science for the common good, full-time immersion of those involved, research shielded from other duties, sustained support for a period of time, and linked and accountable work that's linked to policy and practice and can lead to results. Now, in order to produce these solutions, we need a science activity that is integrative, systems-focused, networked and flexible, transformative, societal, needs-led, globally and regionally connected, strength-based and capacitating. The attitudes are really important in terms of tackling something like this. It's got to be collaborative and inclusive, embracing transdisciplinary and different knowledge systems, and open and accessible to all. The normative orientation is also important. Critical, innovative, and reflective approaches are needed, driven by common good. It's got to be solutions focused, and the end products need to be accountable to society. So the vision for mission-driven science in this space to try and resolve the most critical dilemmas we face on the planet is for science to support the urgent societal transformations towards a more sustainable, equitable, and resilient future that we all need. And for this, we need a nimble, targeted, mission-oriented set of socio-political science initiatives and associated support structures that harness the best of what science can offer in a completely different, albeit largely proven manner, connected as seamlessly with other parts of society, and to implement necessary policies, practices, and behavioral changes. So what is mission science? It is focused on a clearly defined topic, question, or goal. It is singularly goal-orientated and solutions-focused, conducted for a limited period of time until a substantial challenge has been addressed. It is of significant size, scope, and ambition. It requires co-design, inter- and transdisciplinary approaches, direct engagement with policymakers and societal actors, and then science needs to be accessible and used. In short, it needs to be transformative. It's got to change the way society functions, and rapidly and quickly. These are the elements of transdisciplinary work that's familiar to most people. The elements are that whatever happens needs to be co-designed, the science itself needs to be co-produced, and the results of the science needs to be delivered collectively and then co-implemented in terms of policy impact, if we can. So how do we unleash this science, this new science, if you like, of making change happen? It's really important that those rate-limiting steps that are preventing us from achieving societal transformations need to be resolved. We have to be gazing beyond 2030. The science needs to be more equitable. We need to shift towards integrative, inclusive science governance as a whole. And we need the emergence of accountable public institutions as key outcomes of this particular initiative. It's really important that we think about what we're trying to achieve and what the assumptions are. Achieving the SDGs is a socio-political problem. It is not a science problem. Current science system inhibits us from making constructive contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. Incremental reform is not commensurate with the SDG timeline. We have to be a lot quicker and much more radical than that. Mission-driven science in support of society is a design intervention. It is not simply just another way of doing science or doing more science. There are a couple of priorities that we try and focus on in this kind of science mission work. The first is that we are striving for a dignified and a just human existence across the planet for everybody and for all. We must firstly address the basic needs of everybody across the planet. And these rate-limiting questions need to be co-determined with all the partners, all the way from societies to policymakers. These scientific activities need to be responsive, supportive, generative, and constructively critical of existing practices and procedures. The approach needs to be holistic and integrative. We need to apply a systems approach, and we need to deliver transformation and high impact. It must be mission-driven, and that's the only way that we can go about the science to make sure that we transform the way that societies function at the moment. There are a number of critical social partners in delivering this, all the way from champions to high-level political leaders, decision makers at all levels, all the way through the hierarchy to every person, every member of civil society that should be part of this conversation to make sure that what we deliver has real impact. The results that we deliver will not be achieved if we can't change a few things in the process. We have to change the conditions that are preventing us from putting sustainable practices in place. We have to change mindsets, relationships, vested interests, policies and governance systems, resource flows, and of course, practices and behaviors. And this needs to be supported by an institutional that is co-designed with all particular partners, and it must allow for top-notch scientist policy experts to work together for extensive periods of time until we find the necessary solutions. So, key considerations and a few thoughts. It is really important that in addressing these global challenges such as the SDGs and all the other bits and pieces we're trying to deal with, none of us are going to achieve sustainability unilaterally. It is not going to happen. It needs a collective joint effort to do so. This mission-driven research requires a degree of urgency. All the work needs to be tackled at scale, timelessly, and collectively. Business as usual or incremental approach will simply mean that we'll eventually know exactly what we should have done. We should be focusing on global social priorities to ensure that there's a dignified future for humanity. And we need to make sure that we get the right resources to do so. We have managed through the science funding channels to build large science infrastructures such as CERN with a budget of 1.1 billion per annum. Yet when it comes to the shared and universal global societal problems that require our collective effort, we've not managed to do so. Or the funders say it's too difficult and we can't get it done. This is just a figure that summarizes part of the existing problem. Current funding systems on the left-hand side is primarily driven. The largest blocks of the funding goes for in-country science funding. This is understandable because it's driving internet or national interests and national competitive positioning. A small slice of the funding sometimes supports bilateral science engagement, and a very small slice right at the top end maybe goes towards multilateral science and universal access. The problem is that the major global challenges and issues that we face, but mentioned on the right-hand side there, just as a short list of some of those, are precisely those issues that we cannot deal with at a national level independently. It needs collective action and collective abilities to work together across the entire world. And if we can't match the funding system with where the problems are, we're never going to resolve these global shared problems that we want to tackle. We estimate at this stage that it will require about $100 to $200 million per annum over a decade to try and tackle some of these major issues, but we do think it can be done. And I think we are putting pressure on the global science funding community to ensure that we rethink the way we fund science, the way we manage science at a global level for our collective benefit. So if we want to implement mission-driven science, the proposal from the International Science Council is that a number of unique sustainability stations to garner sustained political commitment, harness private sector support, and the best of science have to be established. These stations have to be co-designed with all the relevant partners, and it is probably inevitable that the design and implementation of these stations may disrupt science as we know it, some current initiatives in the scientific world, and science funding as we know it, in order for us to deliver on this effectively. Our objectives are to harness and optimize transdisciplinary approaches to tackle mission-critical global change societal challenges, identify catalytic interventions to overcome rate-limiting barriers to transformative societal responses across the global science missions. So, this is the challenge. This initiative brings together political leverage, societal influence, engaged governments, the private sector, and all funders. Are we up to this daunting socio-political challenge to step up to the level of ambition required? The International Science Council is just stating that if the research community is willing to tackle this challenge, the International Science Council is willing to take this initiative forward and bring on board the necessary partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Albert, for such an excellent presentation. You managed to explain the framework and to, highlight the challenges that we'll face in the upcoming years. Hopefully there will be more discussion about this framework. Now to our next speaker, Dr. Huang He Yong, Head of SRI Center China, Swiss Reinsurance Company, BG branch, and she will speak about insurance mechanisms in the changing risk landscape. Please, Dr. Herwang.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to meet you here. I just will share my screen with you before the speech. So this is Hairan Huang from Swiss Re Institute. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, please.
I'm sharing my screen with you. So today I'm going to discuss a little bit about how the insurance mechanism in the changing risk. So what does a changer means? If 18 months ago, when people talk about the popular words as more around the opportunity, development, and something like that, now we have more concern about the risk, crisis, and some other words like the resilience than before, more than before. So actually the risks around us, including home, mobility, to the working business, from personal health to climate change, it's pretty wide range. So the individuals and the corporates all seek the risk protection and the solution for the risk transfer. So all these parties transfer a portion of these risks to the insurance players by paying premium, as we know. So what is the insurance? So the insurance people, we can just look this picture. It's more like umbrella protection. The risk is under it. So when on one umbrella is not enough, so we need more umbrellas join in to enhance the protection. So that's we call the primary insurance and the reinsurance. So both insurance and the reinsurance providers allow either an individual or corporate to transfer their potential risks or the loss to the other entities in exchange for the premium payments. The reinsurance, on the other hand, is the insurance purchased by another insurance company to share the risk of loss. So reinsurance comes into the picture when an insurance provider does not solely want to bear all the risks. So this chart is clearly described what's the relationship between the insurer, insurance company, and the reinsurance company. And then let's look what kind of the risks, various risks under the insurance solution protection. So this page we listed some of the risks which insurance solutions provide protection against. The risks in the insurance product coverage could be very specific, such as life and health area, the critical illness insurance, high-cost medical insurance, mortality, etc. And also in the property area, such as NatCat, that's a natural climate disaster, and also man-made risks, such as terrorism, as we know. And a casualty areas, such as engineering, and the travel-related and supply chain, it's a pretty wide definition. Also, some of the new developed risks caught our attention in recent years, like the cyber. Our Swiss Re Institute published the SONA report every year and focused on the new risks potential in the future. That the future could be the next year or next 5 years or next 10 years. So we observed some very interesting new possible risks ahead. For example, the electric cigarette will cause the health risk problem or not. Also, like the restarting suspended operation will cause the large accidents or not. So some of the, still we can see some of the problems or some of the risks are hidden somewhere and all coming as a new emerging risks. And what we can do if there are so many risks around us. So here we have we are the insurance system. As an insurance system, the purpose of the insurance is to make the world more resilient via the risk transfer. So also help people have better insight and understand about the risks and handling risks. The insurance providers work with the clients and the partners to insure or reinsure against the large losses. So we call that a risk transfer. So type of risk transfer include the traditional property and casualty and the life and health, the large and complex transactions and public sector risk transfer. And then when we talk about the risk transfer, we need to understand the risk. So that's a risk insights. So our research solutions and the tools enable an improved understanding of risks and opportunities. So we are leveraging new technologies, especially data and analytical capability to further our ability to offer service and the risk insights that help our clients and partners make more data-driven decisions and take risks. So the risk partnerships at here, we mean through the strong partnerships, we create platforms or an ecosystem to process the transfer and distribute the risks. This includes access to capital markets, business to consumer, or products and the new ecosystems. Now we look at how the world is underprotected against the major risks. So this chart, we can take a look at this chart and it shows how the world is under protection scope. Just this is a year 2020 data. We listed the 3 types of the major risks. They are natural catastrophe, mortality, and the health. So which are the 3 key aspects that threat the global economy. So the numbers in the bar, they are protection gap in 2020 for the 3 major risks. And the percent listed above the bars, these are the protection versus total loss, which means the larger percentage, meaning the smaller protection gap. We expect the economic recovery and the rising risk awareness due to the COVID-19 experience to underpin a strengthening of global insurance resilience in 2021. So this after the global insurance protection gap for health, mortality, and natural catastrophe risks combined increased by 6% to the US $1.3 trillion in 2020 amidst the pandemic crisis. So based on the protection gap, we understand more work we need to focus, we need to devote to do in future. So it's a comparison. Among the large risks, the NatCat already becomes one of the major concerns. So this figure shows the difference between economic and insured loss over time. That's how the protection gap comes from. And it is a financial loss generated by catastrophe not covered by insurance in 2020. So the global protection, by years, we can see the global protection gap was around the 2020 around 113 billion US dollar. By decades, we can observe the loss and the protection gap both increased. So the factors could be multiple. So one driven factor could be the economic growth. So another word in insurance is we call the insured exposure increased. Catastrophe it includes the natural catastrophe, we call NatCat, and man-made disaster. So we can look at the next page for the slides for the NatCat loss. This is a natural catastrophe loss risk vary across regions. It's not even the distribution. So the NatCat loss, we include the earthquake, hurricane, flood, and this kind of caused by climate change or by the nature. So this chart shows the protection gaps of the natural catastrophe risks vary across the regions. So behind the protection gap, the factor could be different drivers, including the extreme weather caused the large losses, also the catastrophe pricing models in the commercial. It's not accurate enough. Also could be the insured willingness. So some people in some region, they don't like to buy the insurance protection. Also, it could be the economic growth pace. Also could be the monitor system or prevention system, etc. And then this page we listed some large events, extreme large events in the history by natural cat and also man-made. The man-made shows in the light green color. It includes the year 2001, the 9/11 attack in the New York, and also 2018, the Camp Fire. These are called man-made. The rest of them mostly came from the natural cat loss. And last year, the global started to face the COVID crisis. So people realized not only the NatCat, such as climate change related disaster may cause large loss. So the virus is becoming a big threat for our life and economic. So COVID is still interrupting the life and business as today. So we're not able to estimate the accurate direct loss due to the COVID at this moment, but everyone can feel the impact of this crisis. So the numbers here is not the latest number, unfortunately, just an example to show how big impact of the COVID, estimated by different vendors was last spring. Even that we see the low and high, it means the estimation at that moment, last spring, considering the duration of the COVID. The low is, which if we can finish at very short time, then it's easy to understand. But if today we look at this number, even we don't know what exact number is, we can see the number should close to the high end. So the losses are still going on since last year, already cover a year and a half. So the impact range for the personal mobility, property, and medical to commercial all lines. So wide range of the outcome indicates high degrees of uncertainty, especially for business interruption and workers' compensation. We take one example from the Willis Tower Watson estimated number insured loss of US $10 to $114 billion USD. Depends on the length of lockdown and occurrence of the second wave of infections. So we see something is still going on, is still happening. And the Lloyd of London estimated 2020 underwriting losses covered by the industry at approximate US $107 billion. In addition, they expected the industry to also experience a force in investment portfolios, its indirect loss, right, of an estimated US $96 billion. So bringing the total projected loss to the insured industry to US $203 billion. These numbers could be updated. We can see maybe in the future, near future. The numbers were estimated last spring, as I just mentioned. The new estimated numbers should be vary as last year. We went through the insurance role of the financial protection during the disaster. Most people would think insurance company only pay claims after disaster happened. Actually, it is not enough, not true. So this is a process I showed. How reinsurance and insurance helps to enhance society resilience along the entire process. First is we talk about risk prevention. This is the process of avoiding risk or reducing the probability and the impact of risk, identifying the risk analysis, and the risk avoidance, risk reduction, and risk contingency, risk minimization, secondary risk, residual risk, to ensure all this work to ensure the corporates to adapt the necessary risk management activities through defining terms and conditions in insurance policies also can help to prevent a risk happen or reduce happen. Second stage is we call the risk assessment and the costing. So use risk-specific tools to determine different areas. One is determine specific probability and financial impact values to communicate the severity of the risk in the expected cost. Also identify the maximum financial impact that the risk event may inflict, and assess the effectiveness of multiple risk responses for each risk event. And also can determine how proposed risk events will change the probability of occurrence and the financial impact of the risk event. Incorporate risk proximity into your cost-benefit analysis of risk responses. And then also this tool, we needed to illustrate how spending decisions will impact the expected cost of the risk event, etc. Then we will go to the risk monitor. So risk monitor, this step could be integrated with risk prevention. Monitoring risks with advanced technology. For example, our company, the Swiss Re, developed a parametric solutions, use remote sensoring data and uses satellite images to monitor the cropping or pasture conditions in the agriculture. So I will introduce in the last 2 slides. And then the damage assessment. However, even though we spend a lot of efforts to try to understand the risk, prevent the risk, and do the monitoring the risk, sometimes the risk eventually will happen. So monitoring, we are not able to avoid all the disaster, even we are developing so many tools and technologies. Once the damage occurred, estimate of the expected loss will be the next step. So this current years, data and the technology applied in the InsurTech tools to help the improving efficiency and accuracy in this process, such as AI claim systems, and also anti-fraud in auto and the healthcare claims to fast do the process the claim system. And then the last step we are familiar with is the process claim payment after an event happened. And also we finish all this investigation, which we're quite familiar with. And the last 2 pages, I'll show you the case example our company developed. It's just one of the very, very tremendous these solutions in our company, for example. So this slide is an example of solutions we developed for the agro insurance, agriculture agro insurance. The platform, this is a platform. The platform integrated crop plus meteorological big data covering, this is in China, I mean, covering the 2,300 national meteorological stations to effectively quantify complex risks. It has remote sensoring and the site weather data, crop information, and historical loss data together, integrated together to develop the agriculture risk map with implicit model algorithm to monitor drought, excessive rainfall, and the low temperature, disaster, and perform the business portfolio analysis, real-time view of the business risk status. This is just a screenshot to show what the platform is. So the technology is changing the insurance ecosystem by recent years. China is very active in that. So in China, the tech investment of insurers reaches RMB 35 billion last year, applied in all different areas in the insurance ecosystem, from the operation, claims, pricing, distribution, and product development. So we can expect by coming years, insurance will play a more important role in improving the world to the more resilience. So thanks everybody. We can discuss if you have any question, we can discuss in the Q&A. Thank you, back to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for this very, very interesting presentation, which gives us a sense of how important is the role that the insurance sector can be playing along with the other stakeholders of disaster risk domains, especially in terms of science. Yes, I agree with you that the insurance company can be playing a very important role in enhancing people's and communities and nations' resilience. And this is really very, very important to put you as one of the key players to cooperate with. So thank you for your kind and interesting presentation once again. So now we'd like to continue the session by inviting our respondents to make some comments. And for this, first, I would like to invite Spyros Skismenos from the IRDR Young Scientist, who is co-founder and CEO of My Safety Approved LLC. So please, I hand over to you, Spyros. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahefa and Nisrin, for moderating this wonderful session. Dear participants, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am very excited and honored to be attending the IRDR 2021 conference and to have the opportunity to listen and learn about past and future activities in science and technology for disaster risk reduction. I would like to thank our keynote speakers for their presentations about the challenges and opportunities for cooperation. Their opinions were very well stated and insightful. What I would like to add from the perspective of an IRDR young scientist is that both the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development are critical drivers for innovation and collaboration between the private sector, academia, and society. However, as a young professional working in the private sector, I can assure you that this is not enough. Besides the IRDR program, the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, and the U-Inspire, there are very limited opportunities for young people to collaborate with government agencies, universities, and other early career scientists. This is problematic not only for the young researchers, but also for the private and public sectors, since actions at local, national, and international levels may lack innovation and ownership at the community level. A few decades ago, disaster management was a discipline that was not highlighted as much as it should have been for collaboration opportunities between the different stakeholders. This was in contrast with the increased impacts of natural and man-made disasters that affect both societies and businesses. Fortunately, this approach has changed over the past decade, and now multidisciplinary collaboration in research is a major priority against the impacts of climate change and human-induced disasters. In 2020, we saw how the private sector and governments work together to create new vaccines to ensure immunization against the COVID-19. You might have also seen companies supporting programs for humanitarian action against floods, earthquakes, and other disasters around the world. Obviously, the lack of resources and conflict of interest between different stakeholders can cause issues or slow down processes. When this happens, young professionals are often the ones affected the most because they lack funding, resources, networking, and opportunities to prove their skills. As the founder of My Safety Approved, a company of young professionals which focuses on sustainable development and disaster resilience, I believe that young innovators have the potential to tackle disasters and work effectively on real-world problems, especially when they partner with local communities and professionals. Let me give you a brief example. One of our current projects is in humanitarian engineering. For those not familiar with the term, humanitarian engineering can be best understood as science and technology-based solutions that support people at risk. In our project, we investigate how renewable energy can be used to support remote communities that have limited access to energy and early warning systems. In particular, we focus on early warning systems for flash floods. We collaborate with 3 organizations: Humanitarian and Development Research Initiative at Western Sydney University in Australia, which is the leading partner in this project, the UNESCO Chair on Conservation and Ecotourism of Riparian and Deltaic Ecosystems at International Hellenic University in Greece, and Kathmandu University in Nepal. We also work with 2 communities, Agitis in Greece and Sunkosi in Nepal. We are currently in the developmental phase, where engineers, emergency responders, sociologists, local business owners and residents from both communities come together to design a prototype that will support local energy needs and flood response mechanisms. This engagement with communities and professionals is very beneficial for our young scientists and other local young professionals we work with. It helps us understand how communities and experts perceive vulnerabilities and how we can reach sustainable solutions. I believe that engaging young people in research serves a dual purpose. It helps young scientists gain experience, appropriate training, funding, and broaden their network. For the private sector, young professionals are an important asset in sharing knowledge and finding solutions due to their motivation for success and bringing new ideas and fresh eyes to the existing problems. Youth involvement is even more critical now that we enter a post-COVID-19 world. When this pandemic is over, other ongoing challenges, such as floods, food and water insecurity, and forced migration will be there, waiting, demanding creative and effective solutions. Today, I believe I speak for many of the IRDR young scientists, future researchers, and innovators when I raise my voice and concerns regarding the challenges we face in the field of disaster management, and highlight our potential in research for disaster resilience, sustainable development, and environmental protection. Before I end my response, I would like to say that I'm very thankful to have joined the IRDR Young Scientist Program. The IRDR has provided me with specific knowledge that otherwise I would not have gained. It has also offered me new tools for research and innovation, and the opportunity to work with other young scientists around the world. This cooperation between the IRDR Young Scientists was the best experience I've had during this program, and I look forward for the future and the next steps for the IRDR network. I sincerely hope to see more opportunities in science and technology so that young and future professionals working in disaster risk reduction and sustainable development will be better prepared for the substantial challenges we face. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Spears, for your comments. Very interesting comments. I also agree that the young people should be part of this, let's say, wonderful initiative that the agenda would be giving us for the next 10 years. And for sure, as I mentioned yesterday, this agenda gives us really the opportunity to work together, as it is so comprehensive, and everyone has to play roles to make it happen and to support the SFTRR goals and priorities, as well as the SDGs objectives. So for sure, thank you so much for your comments for this. Now I would like to invite the second respondent, Ye Qian, who is the Executive Director of Integrated Risk Governance Project of Future Earth. Please kindly make your comments, dear Ye Qian. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And first, I thanks for both speakers and gave an excellent presentation, which is really put a beautiful framework actually for this session about how the science communicate with the business. One key word I want to mention, what I heard is the changing world. The changing world is both happens and in the scientific community, as Professor Albert mentioned that. And we are in the scientific community, and we are facing a lot of issues. We change the issues, and we change this a lot of the way we manage it and how we cooperate in our scientific community. And but unfortunately, it's not the scientific community changing. Our society changing even faster. And so Dr. Huang's presentation she shows us that a lot of tremendous challenge we're facing, and the business right now, I think, is way ahead of us. So it's more like Rajiv Shaw, Professor Rajiv Shaw mentioned that if we think about used to be, it's knowledge-driven the action, now it's action really ahead of the knowledge. So that's the real big challenge to the scientific community. And how to really to meet this, to face this challenge. And I think the scientific community, the first things I want to say is how to build up this trust. So right now, what I see is it's more like the two trains on the different track. That's just for this scientific community, we're on the one track and the business on the another track. Although everybody, we can see it, but we are driven actually apart, more faster. And so that's just the big problem, how to build up the trust. And the problem is caused this lack of trust. I think it's is also mentioned by our previous session and this session. The speaker mentioned these things, and is the young people. And right now we still, even in the IRDR, the young scientist program, we are still lacking of this so-called multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary training. So most people are trained by the disciplinary. So when they're facing the real world, they still couldn't take the challenge and really help the society. I think so. How to really help the young scientists to develop the capacity to to meet the challenge of this the changing world. I think it's very important. And the second, I think we really need to develop some kind of toolbox which can help the young scientists, which they can carry, and it's not just doing by themselves. As today we hear that there's a lack of funding, lack of institutional support, but I do think we still lack of some kind of a toolbox or fundamental theory, and this technology really can help the scientists, young scientists, especially for the young scientists, to better serve the society. So the last point I want to emphasize is this global cooperation as emphasized by Albert. And right now the IC really put a beautiful framework to help us scientific community to dealing with the new challenge. But the current situation and how to meet the current pandemic and also political situation, also, I think is also another challenge which we have to really facing and really discuss about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kien, for your comments. I think, you summarized very well the two presentations, and you focus on the role of the scientific community and how they can build up trust and how we can help young scientists in this changing world with all what's happening in the last couple of years, especially the pandemic. And the main challenges for these young scientists are mainly lack of funding, lack of institutional support, and also the role of a global cooperation to support these young scientists to meet the current challenges and to meet the pandemics and other challenging issues. I think we are now, running out of time, but I think we have maybe like a few minutes for a couple of questions. We have one question to Dr. Hyung Herong. It's about, are the consequences of disasters triggered by biological hazards, such as COVID-19 pandemic, ever be included in insurance schemes?
Hi, thank you for a question, Nashri. So yeah, that's a very good question. When we talk about the insurance solution or product or can protect the people, the first we need to understand. So the risk insight is the first step. Unfortunately, like the COVID-19 or the large pandemic, we had some experience, like 2003 in China, they had the pandemic, and also in the US, but it suddenly happened, and the people, they are still trying to understand what is the next virus, how does it impact to the people. So it's not very clearly for us to understand what is the risk exactly. Even the COVID-19, it happened already as 18 years. The scientists and still are working on understanding, exploring how the damage or how what exactly virus is, right? How to prevent it, and what is the risks for people who have this virus, different country or even different the scientists, the method, they have the different opinion about it. So this is really challenging for the insurance company to say without understanding the risk and to develop our product to handle this case. So right now we can see most of the actions taken by the country, the government side more than the commercial side. You are muted, sorry.
Thank you very much. We have one more question, I think, because for Mr. Spiros. Thank you, Spiros, for your insight and incredible work. Could you share what has been done in Sankoshi, Nepal, as you mentioned? I'd love to read that. And next, if IRDR circulates such initiatives to selected IRDR young scientists of respective country would be much appreciated. Spiros, your comments?
Thank you for that question. The research we are actually conducting now in Nepal and Agitis, so actually this is a joint research between 3 universities, as I mentioned, and 2 communities, is still at the developmental phase. But the point, what we're trying to do here is to engage with the communities, engage with local engineers, local people, local business owners, so we can receive their experience and find out what are their vulnerabilities, what are their capabilities, in order to develop a prototype that will increase their energy sufficiency and also increase their resilience against floods, or at least to create a system that will allow them to have some warning mechanisms when the floods are coming. That's it. Thank you.
This is excellent. Thank you very much. Now I will give the floor to Dr. Tayana to wrap up the session.
Yeah, thank you, Nisrin. Before really wrapping up, I was wondering if we can take another question, which I think is very interesting here, that posed by Rashid Khan. Very, very quickly, this one is for Hiram. If you could please, let's say, provide us with some answer to this question very, very quickly. The question is, since the evolving landscape of risk, will there be any investment being made or will be made by insurance companies to help assist science in identifying it and potentially mitigating it? Could you please give some perspective on this question? Thank you.
Hi, it's for me.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Very, very good question, actually. Let's talk about, the general speaking, yes. The insurance industry is very actively working with other partners, including the institutes and also the investment, the companies or the tech companies, to help them to understand the risk and also identify the risk. For example, when I talk about in the beginning, I said the insurance also in China, especially we covered the one type of the product we call the critical illness, the products, healthcare products. And so our company also working with the Harvard University and with the University of Washington and with other external partners to understand what is the cancer, for example, the cancer risk factors, and what is the trend, the future incident trend, and also how to identify the disease at early stage. And this will also impact our product design and also impact the future solution, the platform, the whole system. So this is probably one example I can answer that.
Thank you so much for your response, Aaron. Really, we do appreciate. Now we are coming to the end of this session. To close the session, I would like really to give a big thanks to the participants, especially to the speakers, Albert and Heron, and also the commentators, speakers, and also Uchi Yetian. Thank you so much for your participation and comments and presentation. Also, thank you so much for the audience for staying with us during this session. I think you've learned so much, like we just do. So I'd like to thank also my colleague, my co-moderator, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you so much for co-moderating this session with me. And now to perhaps close really the session, I would like to hand over to Chairman Lee to give some remarks or also to some information to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for all the two moderators and excellent speakers. Very rich keynote and very thoughtful reflections from the respondent. And given the time, we are about to start the closing session. And we will have a 3-minute, dear colleagues, 3 minutes of a break with music. Please stay, don't go away. Just in 3 minutes, we'll start our last session of closing for this very rich conference. So, music.
中文频道，中文频道试音，中文频道，中文频道试音，好。
可以，没事，我要先讲几句话。好，Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the time is up for the closing.
好的，下面呢，我们开始来进入我们的闭幕式环节。然后我们在过去的3天当中呢，举行了所有的时区的这样的一个3天的国际学术会议，非常互动，然后信息也非常丰富。同时呢，我们进行了很多的对话和交流。所以我觉得也非常荣幸啊，非常高兴看到 IRDR 能够它的组委会能够在这次会议呢，邀请到了这么多的专家学者，来自于世界各国，来共同呢进行观点的交流。那么在最后闭幕式的环节啊，首先我们会来听一下这个会议的总结。我们会一共呢有6位年轻的科学家，然后青年科学家来进行呢总结报告呢我们这几天的讨论的一个结果。 然后有3个这个主旨演讲和3个主旨会议。之后我们会邀请李安蒂·贾兰提女士，然后她会给出一个会议纪要以及全球减灾研究议程的启动。之后我们会进入闭幕致辞的环节，我们会邀请我们3位代表，来自于我们这次会议的主办方、承办方 Annie Sophie Stevens 国际科学理事会科学主管 Genty Kirschwood 联合国减少灾害风险办公室全球风险分析与办公室主任，同时还有王庆林教授，中国科学技术协会国际联络部副部长，代表中国科学技术协会来致闭幕词。好的，下面呢，我们先开始我们的会议总结的部分。下面有请联方。好的，尊敬的来宾们、女士们、先生们，大家早上好、下午好、晚上好。我想呢，代表这次会议的报告人，还有青年科学家，参与这次会议的青年科学家，首先呢，我要向我们的会议的主办方组委会来代表我们的感谢给我们这样的一个这个 DL2 领域当中的青年科学家这样一个机会，来参与到此次的会议当中。同时也非常感谢给我们这样一个环节啊，闭幕式的环节来进行报告。在过去的3天当中呢，我们一共呢是有3个主题的演讲发言，还有包括3个主旨会议，然后一共呢是有6位主持、8位发言人、4位评论员，然后同时呢，我们还有我们的3个主旨会议当中的这个23位嘉宾，然后呢，我们的这个记录员负责呢进行呢发言的记录，然后把一些主要的内容呢来记下来了。那么对于呢我们主旨会议1，也就是不断变化的减灾状况与风险动态，我们有3位发言人，来自于亚纳希尔曼教授，还有 Virginia Murray 教授，还有郭华东教授，他们主要呢关注于气候变化与系统风险对发展的影响，还有包括灾害的定义与分类审查，另外还有包括新冠疫情啊等等。那么另外呢，还有就是呢，在支持仙台框架和可持续发展目标过程当中的工作，这一部分呢，它的主持人呢是 Shreb Luiza 和 Virginia Diaz， 记录员是 Michael Boland， 还有我自己。那么这边是我们当时的主旨会议当中的内容。首先呢，第一个，我们现在的新常态就是一个复杂的世界，同时呢，现在在不同的领域、不同的行业，在空间时间上都会存在着相互联系的风险。同时呢，证据也显示，那么风险之间的相互联系性和它的复杂性，那么系统性的风险呢，现在也已经跨越了多个学科和领域。那么现在呢，我们还看到了出现了很多的一些转折点，比如说气候变化、极端事件的出现。另外呢，现在还进行了全新的一个灾害的定义和分类，这个呢是由联合国减灾署和国际科学理事会的术语技术工作组来共同完成的。那么同时呢，如果要对于风险来进行监测和报告的话，这仍然呢会比较难。这也是我们全新的全球研究当中的重点。我们希望通过数据还有数据的技术来加强我们的这个实践，努力实现可持续发展目标和仙台框架。同时呢，还要开发相应的一些指标啊等等。那么另外呢，还有一些国际组织，比如说像 IRDR、RISCAN， 还有国际大数据的研究中心，都发挥了非常重要的作用。它可以增强我们对于风险的研究联系，同时可以实现呢，比如说像仙台框架、巴黎协定可持续发展目标之间的协同效应。那么下面呢，邀请 IRDR 青年科学家Sarah Nichol 来报告。Sarah， 好的，谢谢。那么在第二个主旨演讲当中呢，我们也有一些呢这个发言人，然后呢来进行了这个很多的介绍，比如说像在这个知识，还有包括在行动当中，我们如何来实现。那么我们也总结了呢，我们在如何来推动呢这个 DRR 的这个知识的应用。我们主要呢总结有3方面的内容吧，因为呢内容非常多呀，所以呢我就简单的来说一下吧。那么第一个呢，就是呢说希望能够帮助呢青年的这个科学家，然后呢来从中呢来总结知识，然后呢同时呢考虑到他们的这种跨机构、跨学科、跨领域的性质。我们希望呢能够帮助他们来进行融资，鼓励他们来有更多的机会进行合作，然后获得呢更多的数据和技术的支持。第二个呢，就是在 DRR 的知识方面，还是存在着一些知识的缺口，比如说像呢北半球和南半球之间的这个差距，还有知识之间的差距啊等等。然后在这个过程当中呢，还有提出了一些解决方案，比如说像呢一些鼓励科学家创新，然后还有包括最后1英里的这种方式。那么另外呢，我们还需要来进一步的来创新，我们需要考虑到呢，比如说像创新到底是什么意思？不仅仅是呢技术上开发，还有呢就是谁来定义这种创新。另外呢，创新呢它可以呢通过这种技术推动，也可以通过能力推动来能力拉动来完成。那么同时呢，我们还需要考虑要让青年的科学家，然后在更广泛的范围之内和利益相关方来合作，然后来帮助他们呢实现呢这个能力建设的目标，满足用户的需求。这也是我们所说的实现最后1英里的这样的一个缺口的弥补。这是呢第2部分。下面有请呢 Huling 来介绍第3部分。好的，谢谢。我想来介绍一下呢那个主旨会议的第3部分。那么在这一部分呢，我觉得主要有3位发言人吧，然后他们关于呢像这个仙台框架，还有包括呢像另外呢我们在这一部分呢也有2个报告人啊，或者说比如说我自己，还有包括严芳。那么最关键的呢，就是首先呢，现在全球我们呢有很多的这种红色警报，我们现在离这个实现可持续发展目标呢越来越远，我们需要呢来满足像食物、水、城市能源的需求，我们应该呢来建立一个以新的这种使命为导向的这种框架，那么实现共同设计、共同生产、共同的交付，那么可以呢利用我们的政治资产、社会影响力，让政府、让公共私营部门、企业参与其中。那么从保险业的角度来说呢，它可以保护我们免受风险，同时呢来实现可持续的增长。然后，但是呢，这个全球呢仍然呢面对重大风险的时候是保险不足的。保险和再保险可以呢降低风险所产生的影响，同时可以帮助提升社会的潜力。那么另外呢，同时呢，我们觉得对于青年的科学家来说，那么需要的更多的来进行交流。
那么包括支持啊，还有出资方面，年轻的科学家，他们现在也缺乏这种跨学科合作的培训，科学和行业呢是在2条轨道上。那么我们要找一个办法呢，让他们2者能够衔接起来。好，下面我请这个大会的 记录员来做介绍。我们第一天的大会的过程当中呢，我们是发布了10年的汇编，那么它实际上就是总结了我们整个社区过去10年的成果，以及2010到20年积累的10年的经验。然后大家呢也还有不同的这个国家委员会和工作组呢都做了介绍。然后呢，像肖教授还有玛丽安娜是我们的主持人。然后呢，我们有 Fakudin， 他是代表我们的数据工作组，然后陈博士代表中国委员会，美哈代表法国的国家委员会 ，Hofri Atishiani 是代表伊朗的国家委员会做了发言，潘林教授是代表了我们 RA 的卓越中心做发言，还有 Bisri 是代表我们的青年科学家做了发言，还有 Justin 教授是代表我们的社区韧性国际的卓越中心做了发言，还有2位记录员都是来自 IELCAS 的张海英还有我。好，那么我们实际上呢，主要的这个内容呢都做了总结。那么在第一部分呢，我们是看到大家都非常的努力，更重视科学家在决策过程当中的参与度。然后我们还提到了，我们有证据来表明一个集中化的数据生态系统对灾害暴露和脆弱性的研究是有价值的，是有效、可用以及被用过。然后我们有博士的，还有这个所谓的5P 的这样的一个概念，这个也提出了。这个5个 P 就是代表呢博士、产品、人、激情和表现。然后我们还认为呢，现在我们有各种各样的风险，或者是进行多灾害的这样的一种分析。那么这种多灾害之间的这种跨越时空的不同的情境的互相的作用，也得到了这种动态的研究，包括动态的脆弱性和人员的这些流程都进行了研究。区域社区他们的韧性的战略呢，可以呢开发他们的社会资本，使他们能够在日常生活当中受益，不仅仅是解决灾害。那么科学和技术基于科学数据或者基于证据的 DRR 的决策呢是非常重要的，应该进一步的推进。另外呢，我们还有相关的一些伦理的问题。那么我们的朋友呢，还有我们的主持人都提出伦理的问题，它是与我们的风险的管理和专业知识相关的，这个都要基于考虑。另外的话呢，我们也希望推动不同的国家委员会之间的这种联络性和协作性，这个方面应该得到进一步的加强。这是我们第一部分的主要内容。下面我们来看第2部分的主要讨论。谢谢，能听到我吧？可以听到，非常的清晰。大家好，我是 Michael。我来简单汇报一下我们昨天讨论的主要的内容。我们所关注的是全球科研的新议程，这个当时我们进行了讨论。首先呢，是我们的领导小组来做了这个发言，是John Hammond，还有其他的这个同事，他们做了介绍。后来呢，我们就是核心小组的成员呢，都进行了充分的讨论，而且还总结了他们的一些主要的内容。后面呢，我就简单总结一下，是我做记录的一个结果。第一个的话呢，我们的全球科研的议程，首先呢，它的这个背后的原理是什么？是不是有一些相关的研究的重点？我们说呢有9个，然后呢，是不是会产生这种转变性、变革性的影响？然后它要反复这个多元化的多学科的视角，而且是跨不同部门的视角。而且我们说呢，实际上许多的利益官方呢都非常赞同。另外，我们进行了专家小组讨论，我们说未来要关注关键性的一些紧迫的挑战和问题。那么包括呢这个知识与行动之间的鸿沟，那么解决社会平等和公正的问题，特别是在 DR 的这个领域。另外呢，也使得我们全球的南方国家能够更好地提升他们的话语权。另外，我们还进行了一个圆桌讨论会， 我们要使用呢科学更好地实现转型性的治理，比如说呢，通过跨学科和多利官方的知识的共同的创造来实现。这个呢也反映在我们的议程当中。那么我们要对这个议程啊要更好的去落实，更好的去操作它。最后的话呢，我们也说呢，我们这个文件呢只是我们未来工作的一个起点，它促使我们更好的创造框架，更好的思索协作，来找到风险的解决方案。这是所有人的工作。我们也希望未来的科研的议程能够推进我们科研的工作。下面就是第3部分的一个总结。好，我就来总结一下我们第3个主题的讨论。我们是有6位的发言人，都是来自 IRDR， 这个有各国的委员会啊，还有我们的卓越中心都做了报告。我主要是分为2块。第一个呢是我们科研的议程的3个工作重点，我主要讲的是1和4。1个的话呢，就是了解我们风险的创造和风险渗透的这样的一个原理，以及呢当代的这个风险的格局。然后第4个的话呢，是理解呢这种生物的灾害，还有气候与健康之间的关系的风险，包括呢像新冠疫情啊，还有一些热带地区的这个旋风啊、飓风啊等等，它其实都影响到了居民的安全和健康。另外的话呢，我们就发现呢，这个气候啊和我们的健康之间的关系呢是非常强的。我们解决气候变化的问题，其实也部分可以解决健康安全方面的一些问题。第3个就是城市的健康与城市的风险，这个不仅仅涉及到我们城市当中的新冠疫情，也是一个长期的问题。像这种城市和农村之间的关系，我们是可以更多的从可持续发展的角度切入来进行科研。另外的话呢，还要看这种非线性的转换，我指的是生物的灾害，包括对它如何提高韧性，然后如何要有一个呢应对的未雨绸缪的一个策略。那我们要去关注呢相关的这种脆弱性，还有暴露水平。那么我们还要去看呢这种社会的一些因素，它有可能呢会导致呢一些灾害的风险的进一步的恶化。第3个研究的重点就是实现我们的这种转型性的治理，采取行动减少风险，找到一些创新性的机制。他们可能是要一些非传统的利益官方呢也参与起来，来参与这个灾害应对的规划、应对和灾后恢复的政策的制定。那么比如说呢，我们有了这个新冠疫情之后啊，实际上呢就涉及到我们这个所谓的谣言的传播，以及我们如何更好的管控信息在社交媒体当中的传播的问题。另外的话呢，我们也要鼓励啊和充分的利用社区的参与，使他们发挥领导力。然后第5个工作重点，充分的利用技术创新、数据和知识来减少风险。另外的话呢，来促进我们跨学科和多利益官方的协作，来解决风险的挑战。比如说 DRR、CCA、联合国的 SDG 之间呢，可以保持协调一致，来提升我们对灾害的韧性。OSS 和相关的这些促进者都可以参与。这样的话呢，可以支持一些呢现场的决策和问题的解决。那么让我们的用户呢，能够比如说能够很好的通过不同的语言，在我们的这个数据库的档案库当中来进行检索，使他们更加有效的来做决策。第2就是政府部门、企业和研究机构之间要更好的去沟通，来推动呢所谓的风险信息应用的方法。第3呢，我们要推动开放的数据获取和所谓的开放的科研。 我们科学呢，科学家是拿到了公共的资金来做科研的，科研的成果应该向公众公开。第6个工作重点就是支持区域和国家的科学和知识应用在决策和行动当中。第1个呢，我们研究能力，我们应当呢更多的去参与呢本地的这个决策，把他们的这种科研呢与我们这个国家所关注的这样的一个风险的重点和发展的需求协调起来，然后呢，这种数据和科学呢能够使得我们政府采取一些转型性的治理的模式，采取行动减少风险。另外的话呢，这种所谓的风险相关科学的研究，可以充分的利用原住民的知识来解决。刚才的发言人也提到了，这也是一个非常重要的一点，在很多的这个社区，他们是有不同的风险的。其实可以充分的利用呢本土的这种原住民的知识、本土的知识来解决某些问题。然后这个就是我们科研的议程的一个落实的一个角度。首先的话呢，是一种协调多学科、跨学科的方式，在地方、地区、国家、全球的层次，构建有韧性的社区，更好的落实 DRR 方面的全球科研的议程。科学和科研人员应该把他们自己的科研成果呢，转化成为我们公民和决策者的可以理解的语言。他们能够做出更加明智的决定。第2的话呢，我们要把工程学呢充分的放到我们的 DRM 当中。这个在我们灾害的应对啊、管理啊、开发一些新的这种操作的标准方面都非常重要的，所以要把这种工程学的这个社区啊，他们的这些知识要融入 DRM。年轻人和年轻的这些学者应该呢，在风险科学研究方面做更多的贡献。他们是新一代的这个科学家，我们要提升他们的科研的能力，能够弥补我们科研、科学和决策之间的差距。另外呢，我们要在数据方面更加的开放，我们要做开放数据、开放科学、开源的一些东西，来构造一个更加精妙的风险的减少和管理的构架。然后 IRDR 的网络之间呢，要有更强的协作能力，来提升呢这个国家和地区的灾害方面的韧性，还要与联合国体系的机构更紧密的合作。然后呢，还有自下而上的公民参与特别是呢与这个 EDRM 相关的这种健康方面的问题，这个是在新冠疫情爆发之后呢，就显得更加的凸显了。他们需要有更多的知识和专业经验的分析。然后呢，是这种数据这个解决方案驱动的模式应该得到大家的重视。比如说像一些标准的发布啊，或者说一些工具包的发布啊等等，这个就是我总结的内容。谢谢。好，谢谢我所有的同事的总结，做了非常好的大会内容的总结。谢谢大家的聆听。好，谢谢所有的记录人，非常详细的回顾了我们的讨论的重点和我们讨论的发现。我个人觉得你们工作做的都非常的到位。那下面的话呢，女士们、先生们，我们就非常的荣幸来邀请我们大会的主席以及 IRDR 的科研界的这个领军人贾兰蒂主席来做一个总结。好，谢谢大家，谢谢韩晴丽主任，非常高兴呢，我又见到大家，感谢大家的参与，感谢所有的发言人，感谢所有的参会者，感谢全球的注册参会的人员。
那么我们这次的这个会议呢，正好也显示了大家全球对于我们会议的热情啊。首先呢，我要非常感谢我们的刚才的报告人和我们的记录组，我觉得呢，你们工作的其实是最艰难的，然后把大家的发言来进行总结。 那么同时呢，我还想呢来给大家呢来介绍一些呢这个会议的数字。我们有3个主旨会议，那么包括呢我们所说的全球减灾的研究的议程，还有知识在行动，然后另外呢还有包括像合作的机遇与挑战。每一个里面呢都有2到3位的发言人，同时还有我们的记录员。同时呢，我们还有包括呢 IRDR 的主要会议有3个部分，包括呢我们的工作成功与经验教训、全球减灾研究议程，然后另外呢还有包括对于全球减灾研究议程及其实施工作的见解与思考。那么从更广义的角度来说呀，我们一共有426个人注册了我们的会议，来自于81个国家。我觉得这也是很了不起的一个成就。我也非常感谢会议的主办方啊。同时呢，聊天室我们看到也是非常活跃的。另外呢，大家也要记住啊，我们一共呢有我们的目标啊，就是希望呢能够有同样的男性和女性的发言人。然后呢，大家发言人背景也是非常丰富的，来自于不同的国家、不同的地区。同时呢，每一个环节当中呢，都有2位青年科学家的代表来做发言。我们在社交媒体上，然后 YouTube 呀，然后 CCTV， 然后还有包括其他的这些媒体呢，都进行了转播。那么在第1天、第2天呢，我们的会议呢，一共有超过100万的浏览量，所以我也相信啊，我们的这个会议呢，在公众当中呢是广受欢迎的。那么我从这个会议当中嘛，简单的来说几句吧。那么通过 IRDR， 我们可以看到过去的这些年取得了巨大的进展，包括对于风险进行深入的了解，然后讨论哪些国家和地区的这个脆弱性，如何来他们对这些国家进行保护，他们需要呢在什么样的制定什么样的政策。同时呢，还有包括呢把科学的知识纳入到我们的政策制定过程当中。另外还有包括像技术创新，另外呢包括像开源以及开放数据等等，所以这些呢也都是非常好的一个讨论。通过 IRDR 我们取得了这些的成就。当然呢，我们仍然面前呢还是有很多的挑战。比如说我们在前面的讨论当中，如果我简单的总结一下吧，我们面临着哪些问题、哪些挑战呢？首先呢，我们在 IRDR 当中，我们要采用呢非常复杂的方法应对复杂的问题。有好几位嘉宾呢都已经谈到过了。那么另外呢，我们可以看到，在对于青年科学家的投资和支持是至关重要的。我们也看到啊，那么在这次会议当中，比如说我们在前面的发言当中呢，也听到了大家总结呢，说我们需要哪些工作要去做。那么另外，在地区的合作方面也取得了巨大的进展。但是我知道，对于 IRDR 来说，一个使命就是希望呢能够促进呢全球的合作。另外，我们可以看到呢，最新的全球减灾的议程当中，我们还要做更多的工作。我们尽管过去做的很多，但是这还不够，远远不够。所以呢，我也想呢再一次强调呢这种跨学科、跨领域的合作。跨国界的合作，如果没有这种合作的话，我们是没有办法实现仙台的目标，没有办法实现的巴黎协定以及可持续发展目标的。那么同时呢，我们也看到全球呢在科学的研究的议程当中，那么包括呢要保护我们的地球，那我们列出来了一个有9大研究领域，它是非常多元化的、跨学科的。那么同时呢，还有以一种包容性的方法，更多的强调了呢应对这些挑战。但是除此之外啊，我们在研究领域当中呢所列出来的，我们也需要呢来考虑到对社会产生什么样的影响。比如说像每一个人可以从科学当中来受益，所以我觉得呢，在这次呢我们选定的新的研究议程当中，可以使得我们啊准备好为未来如何做研究指明了更多的方向。 所以呢，我也是非常感谢 IC、UNDR， 还有包括我们的主持人，还有我们的这个嘉宾啊等等。然后另外还有我们会议的主办方，然后他们在这些这个文件的起草过程当中呢，这个所做的工作。那么另外呢，我们这一部分呢，实际上呢，今天会议结束之后啊，就要标志着这个它的草案的软启动。同时呢，我还要非常感谢呢这个我们幕后的工作人员，然后钟丽教授，连芳教授，另外呢还有包括其他的这些同事。我非常希望将来有朝一日能够和大家进行面对面的交流。另外呢，我们还将会继续呢来进行我们的交流，那么希望能够为 IRDR 做出更大的贡献。我呢现在是在印度尼西亚，所以我也邀请大家啊，邀请我们 IRDR 的这个科学家，然后青年科学家，然后呢，2022年在5月份的时候啊，明年5月份，我们应该呢是在巴厘岛，原计划呢是举行我们的会议。如果大家呢都打了疫苗，然后全球恢复了正常，然后我非常希望啊，明年也许可以和大家来进行面对面的交流了。那么这是我的最后的一个介绍。那么我对于我们算 IRDR 作为研究人员，我们所取得的成就是非常自豪的，非常骄傲的。同时，我也相信呢，通过大家的共同的努力呀，我们可以使得人们生活会变得更好，特别是呢，有很多受到疫情、受到其他的灾害影响的人们，他们的生活更加具有韧性。在我的开幕式的致辞当中呢，一样的，我们希望呢能够和大家来携手来应对我们的方法，能够采用呢以我们使命为导向的这种框架来实现我们的目标。非常感谢大家，非常感谢韩教授。好的 ，Rianti， 非常感谢你的这个总结啊，我觉得呢是非常鼓舞人心的。那么您刚才呢也谈到过韧性这个词，我觉得呢这个韧性社会啊，我觉得 IRDR 本身这个社区本身就说明了这样的韧性，这也显示了呢整个科学的这个群体，我们如果能够携起手来共同合作的话，这更多的是代表呢我们的那个韧性。另外呢，我还想呢谈一下呢这个清华的这个 Horizon 水平线项目，一共的呢有这个17个这个青年的工作人员，他们呢在背后呢做我们的社交媒体上的这些宣传和推广的工作。但是呢，除此之外啊，我觉得我们还必须要有领导力，才能够实现这些目标。下面有请联合国减少灾害危险办公室安 Sophie 国际科学理事会 Annie Sophie Stevens 国际科学理事会科学主管来发言。好的，谢谢啊。我觉得这个3天的内容呢是非常丰富的，也是让我们全面的了解了在 IRDR 的大家庭当中，大家所做的一些科学研究，可以帮助我们来将来走得更好，指明了未来的发展方向。我想代表国际科学理事会，我要感谢大家所有人呢来在这个会上来做发言。那么同时呢，我也感谢大家呢，就是我们的目标是一致的。在过去的3天当中呢，我也听到过，我们需要采用呢更加的综合性的风险分析的方法。我们需要对于风险进行一个全面的分析，包括环境风险、自然风险，还有人为的风险等等。更重要的一点呢，就是我们需要呢利用数据进行数据的采集，然后把不同的国家的决策过程当中的一些决策的想法背后的理念来进行分享。那么另外呢，还有一点呢，这我们需要呢科学家也要来进行转型，更加开放、更加透明、更加合作。这样的话，我们才能够真正的来实现一个知识的共享。所有的这些呢，也都 代表着我们全球所面临的风险是不断的变化的。另外呢，在我们这次会议当中呢，我们和联合国的减少灾害风险办公室还有其他的各方来进行合作，希望致力于进一步的推动呢减灾工作的开展。我们也非常期望着在这次呢减灾的这个议程当中所列出来的新的几大研究重点的开展。那么在这次议程当中啊，可以帮助我们呢，不仅仅是对于现有的合作来进行回顾，将来还可以进行更多的方向。我们要非常的感谢呢 IPO， 我们要感谢我们所有的这个会议的主办方，然后呢工作人员。另外呢，我还要非常感谢呢像这个空间技术委员会，然后中国科学技术协会，然后感谢呢他们在这么多年当中呢来给我们的支持。我们还要感谢呢这个IRDR 的国际项目办公室委员会，中国科学院空天信息创新研究院。然后另外呢，我们还要感谢韩教授以及我们还他的主持人，把我们召集在了一起。那么我觉得我们作为这个 IRDR 的大家庭吧，我觉得这次会议举办的是非常成功的，也非常感谢大家。好的，谢谢。感谢安 Sophie， 刚才呢，你非常这个让我们充满希望、充满鼓舞的这个总结。下面有请 Janty Kirschwood， 联合国减少灾害风险办公室全球风险分析与报告办公室主任 Kirschwood 教授。好的，非常感谢啊。首先呢，我也是呢要重复一下，我要感谢大家的所有人。刚才呢，安 Sophie 已经呢列出来了，说明了我们的这个主办单位国际科学理事会、联合国减少灾害风险办公室、中国科学技术协会，还有我们的协办单位中科院、中国社科院、发展中国家科学院，另外还有我们的组织委员会。我们的 IRDR 科学委员会、国际科学理事会，还有包括我们的 IRDR 国际项目办公室、IRDR 中国委员会、中国科学院空天信息创新研究院、中国国际科技交流中心，当然还有我们的合作单位 IRDR 国家委员会及国际绝弱中心、IC 项目和 UN 机构，然后地平线青年领军人才培育计划，还有私营部门和社会组织等等，另外当然还有我们的 Rianti 主席等等。那么我们也是非常感谢呢你在这次会议当中呢所发挥的领导力。我也很荣幸能够参加今天我们这个闭幕式的讨论。那么对于的科学来说，我们呢通过呢科学研究来减少灾害，在这一部分呢我们已经做了有10年多的历史了。之后呢 IRDR 呢，那么也是在实现呢这个仙台框架当中的减灾目标做出了重大的贡献。那么从科研的领域来说呢，我们进一步的加强了我们对于风险的理解。那么在过去的3天当中呢，我们可以通过讨论可以看到 IRDR 所取得的成就是建立在我们的合作还有这个交流的基础之上的。另外呢，我们还讨论了最新的一些趋势，还有包括1000多的青年科学家如何获得来支持。另外呢，在国际的范围之内建立合作关系，新技术的推动，所有的这些都使得 IRDR 呢成为了这个不可或缺的一部分。那么同时呢，最新的这样的一个研究议程为我们打开了全新的大门。同时我也非常希望这个文件通过了之后，将会给我们带来呢未来10年的研究的重点。同时呢，对于决策的制定者来说，对于各方包括科学家能够共同来实现一个和平的平等的社会。我觉得呢，我可以代表大家所有人 UNDRR 来发言。那么我们非常希望着将来能够和大家进行更多的合作。我也想祝贺 IRDR 在过去的10年当中所取得的成就。好的，非常感谢，谢詹婷。
没有问题，我们充满信心，每一个 IRDR 大家庭的成员都会继续的与联合国的 DRR 署、灾害署更好的合作， 然后我们作为大家庭，我们会把仙台框架以及联合国的2030年议程好好的落实好。下面的话呢，我想邀请王庆龄教授做一个闭幕致辞。
尊敬的韩群力主任、贾兰迪主席、史蒂文森主管、伍德主任、各位代表、专家朋友们，大家好。经过会议3天时间的沟通和交流，各位参会的专家学者围绕 IRDR 计划10年发展成果和未来全球减灾防灾风险防控的新思维和新思路进行了深入的探讨，提出了新的全球减灾研究议程实施建议。作为大会的主办方之一，我仅代表中国科协向大会的成功举办以及各方的深度参与表示诚挚的感谢。正如联合国长秘书长助理孙鸟正美女士在大会开幕式上所说的，本次会议参会人员的阵容是非常强大的。刚才贾兰迪主席也提到，本次会议呢吸引了来自81个国家和地区的426位专家参加会议。那么单日的网络平均浏览量超过了100万。我们注意到的话呢，在中国之外的浏览量达到了98万，在中国国内是9.6万。这个呢表示的话，在国际上的浏览量是中国本土的浏览量的10倍，也体现了这次会议呢得到了全球的广泛重视，它的国际性得到了很好的突出。这次会议给人们特别印象深刻的是，很多青年的科学家在这次会议上发挥了非常优秀的作用。这也是我们相信在新的计划之中，新的科学家一定能够担当起重任，使我们对减灾防灾的未来更加有信心了。各位专家、各位代表，应对重大自然灾害是需要世界各国共同担当的责任。我们应以联合国2030可持续发展议程为共识，积极拓展世界各国及地区间的合作，加深国际组织间的减灾科技交流协作，聚焦自然灾害和气候变化、人类健康等灾害风险问题，加强各国科研人员的联合研究，加速全球灾害治理与风险防控体系改革，共同努力解决全球性减灾科学问题，有效应对灾害挑战。很高兴本次会议在 IRDR 计划过去10年研究成果的基础上，推出了新的减少灾害风险全球研究议程，谋划开展更高服务维度、更广泛科学领域的防灾减灾和风险防控国际大计划。中国科学家们非常愿意为 IRDR 计划在新的全球减灾和风险防控研究议程中继续贡献自己的力量。中国科协也愿意承担更多的责任，继续深入参与这一重要的科学议程。欢迎大家在新的研究议程中有更多的机会在北京相聚，在中国相聚。祝大家身体健康，工作顺利。谢谢大家。
非常感谢王庆龄教授的结束致辞，也非常感谢呢您热情洋溢的讯息。您所传达出的这个讯息呢，我觉得其他的 IUCN 啊，还有 UNDR 和其他的整个科学界呢，都会非常的赞同。那么能够引领我们走向下一个阶段的科研活动。亲爱的同事们、女士们、先生们，我们今天呢也就拖延了5分钟左右。那么我想呢，我们有如此丰富和深入的探讨，再加上我们高质量的信息的共享和高质量的发言报告，也标志着我们2021灾害风险综合研究国际会议即将落幕。但是我们只是一次会议的落幕，但它也标志着我们新一个阶段科研活动的开始。刚才呢，我们几位专家都讲到了新的旅程，今天呢刚刚起航。那么我们有了一个新的日程，它是我们科研工作的新的指南。那么我也代表呢我们的科学界，代表我们的主办方，预祝大家呢早上好、下午好和晚上好。那么我们就从今天呢起航，然后我们期待呢 下一次的巴黎再相见。希望我们2022年巴黎再相见。谢谢大家，谢谢所有的技术支持人员，谢谢翻译们，谢谢所有的参会者。好，我们的大会呢就到此胜利闭幕，谢谢大家。
音乐，
谢谢，
拜拜。
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
那个摄像，拜拜，拜拜 ，Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.